shift happened, but the Guardian races were able to prevent the stellar activation cycle from fully commencing, so it didn't get into a situation that would be as bad as this time. This is why the information that I've got on this stuff and the really detailed maps and everything just came through literally in the last week, and it was like about 150-page transmission of data, small print. So this is why it was taking me some time to analyze this data really fast, try to pull the major important points for you. So when you go home, even if you don't have one of the big Templar manuals, I mean, I suggest getting one for anybody that wants to work with this stuff. We give them to you free, we could afford it, but we can't afford to give them to everybody. They tell you all sorts of stuff. I mean, it touches the spiritual stuff, but also tells you exactly, like, the detailed history, the history that we're taking it from there in this workshop. And it also tells you how to do roundtables, and it tells you all you need to know to become part of the Masters Templar Stewardship Initiative, and that's what this program is. What we're teaching is the opportunity to participate in a very effective way that could literally change the events in the next 3 to 10 year period. And if they're not changed, it's not going to be a pretty picture here. Things were going better 5 years ago, when there were certain agreements being made with the Anunnaki races where they would cooperate. But ever since September 12th of 2000, when all of the competing fallen angelic races decided they were going to get together, combined their technologies, open the two wormholes together in order to defeat the Guardian races, in order to get this place, that's when we got in trouble. And at this point, we can make a difference. We don't have to be terrified of it, but to underestimate the seriousness of the conditions will lead to kind of another set of shocking events that would very quickly unfold. That's what's interesting about this. What is taking place would happen so fast once it was set in motion, just like we watched, you know, two buildings go down because planes hit them, and all of a sudden we're bombing Afghanistan and going after Iraq now. I mean, within a month's time. The whole political landscape of the planet changed with one event. This is how fast. That was a shock. That was shock therapy for me, because they told me it could go this way, and if certain things go this way, you know, the Illuminati will advance. You're like, well, okay, make a mental note, you know. And then all of a sudden, bang, and it happened. There's other plans that go with this, such as martial law and invoking FEMA and the War Powers Act in the United States. We got a taste of what that might mean when the trade centers went down, because they literally sealed all the entrances and exits to New York City. Nobody could get in or out. The planes were all grounded. Nobody could fly. The buses stopped and the railways stopped. All of a sudden, Americans who were used to being able to go anywhere they want, whenever they want, found themselves quarantined in their own neighborhoods. That could happen like that. And it's part of the plan, but not quite yet. They're getting closer. They need a few more staged terrorist attacks and a couple natural disasters thrown in before they can get away with that without having rebellion on their hands. What we're being set up for right now, politically, is a situation where we get so scared of the big bad world out there that when our president says he has to enact the War Powers Act and has to say, for our protection, all of this martial law has to come down because we're not safe without it, we'll go, okay, that's good. We'll let it happen. There'll be a few little rebel groups that say, wait a minute, you know, like the Patriots and those guys, wait a minute, you know, this is unconstitutional. So what? They've been doing unconstitutional stuff since the 1920s, you know? Why should they care now if we care? All right. Sorry. So what I'd like to do is, in this, like today, I want to cover the real issues, how we got here, who it is that's running these agendas, what their plan is, their immediate plan. Now, if we had them off at the pass, which we're going to attempt to do, that's why we're all going, like the whole bunch of us are going to Peru, the end of December going into January, and we're going in direct combat, not in the whole Peru trip, but there's one part of this trip where we're going to an island. What is the name of the island, Marianne? Where are you? Amatani. I keep wanting to say Amenti. And I think there must be a connection. I didn't ask, but that island is where combat is going to take place. I don't even know what it's going to look like. It's going to be psychic combat. I know that. It's going to be psychotronic combat. I know that too. So going to Peru is safe. We're going to get roundtables done, and Machu Picchu is under Guardian control. There's some other bases there, but the Guardians have the main grids. So it's a very, very special place. Picchu is a very special place, and it's very safe, and we're very safe while we're there. We can get a lot of work done. And what we're going to try to do at Machu Picchu is to counterbalance and recode the the natural seals as they're releasing, because I told you that we're going to have our seal number 8 is going to release, and it's going to release Jehovian seal 4. So it's from Pichu that we're going to set the grids that will begin the harmonization process of these frequencies as they go. But when we get to Titicaca, after we go to Pichu, that's when we're going to be working on continuing clearing these frequencies, and this is when they're going to try to, once we have the grids open, try to use the grids we've opened to run their pulses through in order to put those two wormholes together. And this is going to be the deciding game. It's going to take place on that island. And the deciding game is going to be if they manage to get that pulse through. If our group isn't strong enough to run enough D12 and higher frequency, which will be taught progressively before then, how to amplify the roundtables that we're running. If we're not able to block that and recode their pulses as they come through. Because see, if their pulses, we have a strong D12 and higher field, and their pulses come through, hits our field, and it'll harmonize their pulses, so they won't cause any harm. But if our D12 field isn't strong enough, it will start to erode our D12 field. And at that point, their pulse will get through. And at that point, we have about 3 months' time, because it takes anywhere from 3 to 12 months before when a seal releases. Now, this is not just seals releasing. This is seals releasing and having them amplified and having sonic pulses thrown through them to amplify them very, very strongly, because they need to, if you can picture the two wormholes, which are over here. Okay. The two wormholes are over there. Now, they have to be linked to become one big one. So what they need to do is hit the spot in between them with a very intense pulse that will literally rip a hole in what you could call the fabric of time, which is a frequency wall between here and the phantom. If they do that, it's all over. We can't stop it. The guardians can't stop it. Nobody can stop it. So at that point, it wouldn't happen immediately. We're not just going to and right then get sucked into a wormhole. It won't go like that. It's going to be a long, drawn-out process between now and 2008 that would unfold if they're successful. It would involve progressively escalating Earth changes, first localized, that would get stronger and stronger and stronger. It would involve progressive acceleration of the World War III drama to get rid of populations. And eventually it would involve Space Brothers coming in to say, oh, you guys are really messing up your planet, we're going to show you how to run it now. And they would get their physical presence on planet. And from there, they would use us to set up a couple little things that they still need built, which are literal plants, like buildings with particular types of frequency generation machines in them. So they could use those machines with the HARP network that's already here, which they helped us to build to make sure it was on planet because it was going to be needed in their plan. They will use us and our ability to build this technology for them to, by the year 2008, have the stuff on planet, have their physical presence and the physical machinery on planet, so where they can transmit the hyper pulses, hyper intense sonic pulses that they need to break through the force fields that are on the inner Earth portals. So this is their plan, and guess what? After they do that, they don't need us anymore. And what happens after they do that in a stellar activation cycle is pole shift, rapid pole shift. Within about 3 months it starts to go, and within 3 years it completely flips. Literally. And that is just decimation on a planetary level. There have been those times on this planet before, and it was like hitting the restart button, because everything has to be reseeded here when that happens. So, if they get their way, that is what the people who stay here would see. If it goes that bad, what we will be guided to do is to, first of all, they will give us hyper-advanced DNA activation techniques, so we can definitely get through and sustain DNA activation where we could be in inner Earth and deal with the frequencies there. Because inner Earth is in a timeline that's a little bit ahead of ours, which means it's faster, which means it oscillates, the particles oscillate faster. If we have a slower oscillation rhythm in our body molecules and we try to go through a stargate into a place that has a faster frequency and our bodies can't hold it, it creates molecular compaction, it's called, on the inside, at the atomic level. What this creates is spontaneous combustion of the physical form. Now, that they won't take us through gates if that's going to happen, because when that happens, we end up, the consciousness fragments. It's not like you can just get out of your body and your body can spontaneously combust. You go with it. You literally have your consciousness fragmented, and that's a whole other start evolution all over again to get yourself out of here. So they won't take you through, with the chance of losing your body. Some people who can't make the transition, who their bodies just need too much work and there's not enough time, will actually choose other ways to leave, such as the people that were in the accidents recently. they had agreements to leave at a certain time. We all make agreements to when we're going to come in and be born in a system, and when, depending on how things go, we give ourselves several options for our death experience or ascension experience. If we're going to go through stargates and take our bodies with us, then we don't choose a death experience. But the people who are leaving planet right now, and there's going to be progressively more of them, if we can, there's the sadness part where you think, oh, some of them will be victimized. Some of them are agreeing to play that role. Not here. Their personalities don't know it. But their souls know it. They're trying to get them out before they end up in Phantom Matrix. So if they can't take their bodies through, they'll opt for being in a place where a natural disaster happens or where a terrorist attack happens, where their bodies go, but their consciousness gets to get out of that body and up out of the density 1 time cycles, so it doesn't have to reincarnate and get sucked down into the Phantom Matrix. This has literally been something that for thousands and thousands of years, what has been happening when people die here since 10,500 BC. Most of them get hijacked. As soon as the body, as soon as you die, your consciousness starts to raise in frequency and your body starts to drop in frequency until they separate and sever. What normally happens is your consciousness keeps raising in frequency, and then it will go up and connect to your D5 level of self. That's where you see the light at the end of the tunnel in your death experiences. That's when you're connecting with the center of your soul matrix in D5. What these wormholes and the people who run them have been doing is they have been literally sealing off the ability to make that transition out of this planetary system into the next density level. They have been siphoning off people when they die and dragging them into Phantom Matrix. There's a whole bunch of them there that know this is the time they can get out. And after this time, that matrix is going to be closed. It's going to be literally probably millions of years before anybody tries to go back in there, because it's a place that almost took this matrix down, trying to save it. So right now, there's a whole bunch of people, and people that aren't in bodies anymore, that are trying to get the heck out. So if we start to see tragedies and things happening, which we are going to happen, they're already happening. If you happen to live in Afghanistan now, you think it's the end of the world, because every time you look, there's bombs dropping, and everything you know is blowing up around you. And things like that could come here. And if the Illuminati One World Order agenda unfolds the way they want it, they will come here. Because this was supposed to be, America was supposed to be the final chessboard for whoever was left standing on the field. This was going to be the final chessboard where the rest of the drama would be unfolded. And it's not going to be unfolded tomorrow. The drama they have planned, if they can get things to 2003 where they want them, they're not going to fully unfold the whole drama right then. They have till 2008 if they can do their dimensional blend experiment in 2003. That's the time when they will link our planetary grids through those APIM systems directly into the grids of Phantom Matrix planets. And if that link is made, we can't pull them apart in time without completely causing pole shift all over the place. So they are trying to scramble for 2003 to make sure they have critical mass frequency dominance in the planetary grids. And that's what our guys are doing too. Whoever has this critical mass by August 12th, 2003 are going to be the ones who win the territory, basically. Now, where Peru fits in, whoever wins that round, that will be the determining factor whether or not you'll have critical mass in 2003. If we can head them off at the pass and have a really good experience as far as getting the frequencies in the grids that we need in Peru, we will be able to change the game where they won't be able to do the 2003 dimensional blend experiment. That doesn't mean they'll go away real fast. What it means is they're going to be really mad. And they're probably going to, because they realize their plan isn't going to work, they're probably just going to go into vengeance mode, which means they'll still try to run at least the outer aspects of the One World Order agenda just to antagonize us, which would mean continue the World War III drama and eventually have the final conflict drama come down where they let us know we're there and just do things to antagonize us. But they won't be able to fulfill their mission, which is to get a hold of Earth so they can get into inner Earth to get the halls of Amenti, stargates. They will not be able to do that if they don't do the dimensional blend experiment in 2003. And they cannot do that if it goes well in the Peru thing, because our grids will begin to hold too much D12 frequency and they will not be able to link them in. So right now we're in a crucial period that's literally going to determine what the destiny of this race and this planet is going to be. And not just this race and this planet, but also this time matrix, because if Earth goes down, it starts to take the Pleiades at D5, then the Sirius system at D6, the Arcturus system at D7, the Orion system at D8. It progressively creates a chain reaction effect that will drag all of them down in to the phantom matrix subtime cycle. So we have a job before us, and I'm really glad that all of you seem to like be right here with me. Some people say, I don't want to hear this, you know, there are some people who really just don't want to deal with it. This is not the baby's group. This information is the master's level teachings, and I mean master's level, because this is, if anybody's going to pull us out of this, it's going to be the people that learn these techniques fast enough to make a difference. We don't have time to take them through 12. It used to be every level of this data, you get 12 years of training, right? And then you go to the next level, and then you might learn about like Templar Mechanics 101, and then maybe 12 years later you get on to the middle group. We're getting literally the top end of the information to start with, because there's no time for the rest. Yes?
What can we do to help you improve the people that you get? Is there something that you can do at the same time? Can we link with you?
Yes. Yeah, we're going to go. They haven't given us the linking techniques yet, because there's 2 techniques they said they can't give us yet, because you can't use them in the grids yet, because there's certain things that need to be activated in the planetary grids that they could give us the technique, but it's not going to do any good, and they're on security release, which means they give them to us as close to when we need to use them as possible, so the other guys don't intercept it and try to do something with it. Because we're using Templar mechanics that are above the level of the Illuminati's knowledge. They don't have the maps. We've got them. They have partial maps. And it drives them nuts, because they're trying to figure out where certain things are, and they're guessing, and they're trying to do like sacred geometries and making triangles and stars all over papers and maps and trying to figure out where they are. You need the Cathara grid, which is, I'll show you that, I don't know if I have that in this one. All right, this little diagram here, I'll just hold this up for now, we'll go over it later. That is what I'm talking about when I say a Cathara grid. Hey, cool, you got a multi-dimensional one there. Somebody built one back there. All right, that is the key to understanding maps here and throughout the galactic universes, because it is the core template that stargates are aligned on. So these are the things that the Illuminati, this is why there's going to be a lot of Illuminati people coming over for redemption contracts on this one, because they've been scared. They didn't know, they made deals with some ETs, found out these ETs are bad guys. And they're bigger, and they're stronger, and they're tougher, and they totally underestimated them. And they're scared. They don't know what else to do, so they try to, you know, kiss up to them, literally, just to hopefully save their own skin. At this point, when they see the information that we're putting out, they're going to know that we know certain things that they know some of their higher levels have some of, but they won't tell them. So they're going to be coming over because of the information we have. Now, it's really, to have this information, the information from what is called the Book of Maps and Keys, which was one of the books that Jeshua Melchizedek translated off of the CDD plates in the Essene period. This hasn't been on the planet since that time, and the full set of Maps and Keys books hasn't been here since 10,500 BC. These were the keys to learning to work with this Templar. It showed you where the real axiotonal lines were and the real ley lines were. Because what we have right now is a lot of stuff coming up from the Thoth groups and from the Enoch groups and from a bunch of other groups who have their little APIN systems. They're telling you, oh, ley lines are here, so you need to activate this. They're having people activate their APIN systems. They're not showing them where the real grid lines are. They're showing them where the grid lines for the APIN systems are, so they can go out there, do sacred ceremony, and activate grids for them. So what we have now are the grids that are underneath all of those grids. There's going to be a lot of information given. There's 2 emergency, what we call Regents Consulate meetings. These are for people who really want to, you know, that really feel like they want to participate on the world level with this. One's going to be October, what is it? 27th? October 27th in New York City, and the other November 10th in Florida. So we're doing one up north and one, you know, down in the south. These are the meetings that we're going to be given the techniques, because by then the things are going to be activating in the grids that will allow us to use this next level of technique that has to do with using round tables and what they call the Vecca codes. There's a series of mathematical codings that have been very, very protected for a very long time that will give you the ability to reach into literally 3 other time matrices to draw power, not only to get your own fields fortified, but to anchor it here in the planetary grids. So we'll be talking more about that as we go along, getting closer to the Peru time, and there'll be updates and everything given. But for now, what I wanted to do for today's workshop. I wanted to really bring this home for you to help it make sense to you as far as who are we dealing with, how did it get here? Because all of a sudden, like you didn't know any of this yesterday, you come into a workshop and all of a sudden, it's like, God, wormholes, and I've heard of Montauk, didn't know exactly what that was, heard of Philadelphia Experiment. I just hit you with a lot of information. It will help if you could see the progression. It'll also help when you see the progression through the period of time that we know as World War II. The underlying things that were going on behind that, because this is exactly what's going to be going on in the dramas we're watching now. We're going to go after Iraq. I know that, because Iraq right now is being run behind the scenes by a group of Illuminati who are from the Omicron Draconian rebelling matrix. They don't want to do the United Resistance. The United Resistance happens to need what's called Q Site 10, the activation site for Stargate 10, for the Peru time when we're going to Peru. So it ought to be interesting to see how fast either Saddam Hussein begins to cooperate or how fast he's removed, because they need to get the territories down in the Persian Gulf, because that's where Stargate 10 and its Q site are located. Iran is already cooperating, and it will probably stay that way. We're going to watch political things happen here and kind of scratch our heads. They'll give us one reason why they're happening. But if you start to look at it, some of the reasons they're given and the reactions we're taking for those reasons seem a little bit not quite coherent with each other.
And you'll notice in the paper they just started talking about the U.S. possibly taking out Saddam Hussein.
Did
And
they?
trying to decide whether to do that or not.
I heard someplace on the news, wasn't there something on the news on this morning that they already started bombing something over there?
There was that they had a control and command center today.
Yeah, they bombed a control and command center in Iraq today. That's what, it was on the news. He heard it on the news this morning.
To do with the violation of the airspace issue.
It had to do with the violation of the airspace issue. He said, so we've already started. I'm watching how fast this is moving, and I'm going, oh my God. You know, they're in a big rush. Why? They had this all planned out, step by step. They were going to start it in the end of 2002, and then they were going to move it through 2003, and by 2005 they'd have everybody ready for contact, right? Well, we threw some cogs in their wheels there, because we started to get D12 frequency activated on the planet, which has the ability to literally seal them out of the portals and the grids. So they kind of, their big move was in August 12th of 2001. That's when they realized the one thing that they dreaded happening. Because, see, for centuries they've been cultivating us. Go forth and multiply, make millions of babies. They're little bodies with DNA that, if you run it in reverse, puts more frequency into the planetary grids. They were counting on humans having their DNA in reversal. And what has happened, because of the groups of indigos all over the planet that are working in one form or another with activating DNA on the proper spin, using the proper Merkaba spin, we've hit critical mass in the grids, and it's now clearing the DNA templates of people who don't even want to hear about this stuff all over the planet. All of a sudden, who they planned to be their little army that would actually get things done for them are actually sending D12 frequency into the grids now, which is their enemy. So they're going on a campaign of, first of all, they have to move forward very quickly, or they're going to lose complete control of the game. And part of this campaign is going to be to reduce the number of human population. Because right now, human population that they had been planning on as one of their trump cards to get the reverse codings going into the grids is now going to send the right codings into the grids. So you're going to see political events contrived in a way, and areas that you see where real messes are happening, where there's people really being killed, particularly for political reasons, but also natural disaster reasons. These are areas that have heavy concentration of humans and or indigo children, because they want to get rid of as many of them as possible, have just enough to open the grids, because they can't get rid of them all. If they get rid of all of us, then they can't access the core template, the planetary grids, because only human and indigo DNA is keyed to the template. But they need to reduce the populations. So you're going to see, put under the guise of necessary political maneuvering, a human genocide program. And that's what it is. Right now, the people in Afghanistan are part of that. The rulers of Afghanistan, in truth, aren't human, but most of the Afghani people around them are. And there is a huge concentration over there of Maji line indigos that aren't awake yet. They're still stuck in the Muslim trap of what they've been taught in their culture. But their DNA is going to be activating, and they would start to get an understanding of greater things. Because when your DNA activates, even if you never heard of metaphysics before, you start to have perceptions. you start to have perceptions of higher dimensional things. You start to have understandings come to you from your own soul level and higher. They're trying to get rid of groups of Magi that they don't need, because they need certain indigos because they hold the key codes to the grids, the final level of security codes on the planetary grids, which means if you want to get into the planetary grids to do something to them, first they have to open. And there's several layers of security keys, frequencies, that are in those grids that only certain races carry. The Magi Grail Line races, which are the indigo children, carry the final set that if they don't put their keys in the grids to open the grids, the planet goes into pole shift, because the grids will not open to allow any more of the Stargate frequencies to come in. That's why we're always on planet when it's time for a stellar activation to simply run our codes so the gates open the right way. But if they were to wipe us out, they couldn't get the grid lines open, and they need the grid lines open if they're going to bond the core template of our planet to one in the Phantom Matrix. They have to have the grids open. So it's a very interesting game of strategy. It's like a cat and mouse game, sort of. It's like tit for tat. Okay, you do this. Well, we have to do this. And we're right smack in the middle of it. It's going to be unfolding very quickly. So one of the things that I wanted to start with this was just getting familiar with who are these people anyway. You know, we've talked about Illuminati races. Yes, Jay?
Quick question.
Uh-huh.
I've heard you say there's 550,000 indigos here on the planet. Is there a critical mass of those that have to awaken before the rest of those indigos can awaken, or do they all have to awaken?
Actually, the way it's structured is there's three types of indigos, indigos 1, 2, and 3. Indigo type 1s have the 36 to 48 strand DNA templates. They can hold the most frequency. If they're triggered in activation first, they will bring so much frequency into the planet and into the tribal shield, which is the frequency spectra that links anything of a race together, that they will trigger activation of the indigo 2s, and they will trigger the 3s, and they will trigger the humans. So it works down from the top, the ones that can hold the most frequency. That's why the indigo, most of the people who come to these workshops are indigo 1 or 2. Now, very rarely do we have just a 12-strand human coming to these, because the frequency of information that we put these out on is literally D6 and higher, and most humans don't have their 6th strand activated. Indigos come in with their 6th strand activated at birth, but they don't have strands 4 and 5 activated, so they still have to wake up. They still have to get strand 3, which we all have, plugged into strand 4 and 5 to get their wake up where they get their D6 and higher information. So,
Do you know what that number is?
The number of,
Critical mass number for indigo.
as far as how many we need to wake up, it's already happened. That's why they're in such and there's a saying you use that I love. It's an English saying that Michael uses, got their knickers in a twist. And it fits. That's exactly why they've decided to advance as quickly as possible the One World Order agenda, because we've been doing so well, because there's so many, a lot of the Indigo 1s activated, triggered activation of the Indigo 2s, the humans are starting already. They're getting 12 code activations, which means, now when I talk about 12 code activations of DNA, a human DNA imprint has 12 strands. Each strand has 12 subharmonics to it, or 12 smaller codes within it. Now, science looks at us and looks at DNA and says, oh, there's 2 strands of DNA. Actually, what they're seeing there is 1. That's a double helix strand. That would count as 1 strand. There are 12 double helix strands in the human DNA template. There are more in the indigo DNA template. Right now, science has identified 4 what they call base pairs, which are the chemicals that human DNA, all DNA, is made out of. Chemical base pairs. It's called a base 4 genetic alphabet, and supposedly everything on the planet has a base 4 genetic alphabet. It's not supposed to. Everything on the planet is supposed to have what's called a variable base genetic alphabet. Right now, scientists look at DNA, and they have this interesting thing that even didn't make a lot of sense to them in the beginning, and I don't think it does still. Why do sometimes cherry trees have more base pairs, more genes, more chromosomes than humans? You'd think more complicated life forms would have more chromosomes. Now, chromosome count is based on count of what they call genes. It goes back down into how many base pairs and groupings, large groupings of base pairs that form the genes that form, build up to form chromosomes. Science looks at chromosomes. What they're seeing right now is shredded chromosomes. What they're calling one chromosome is very often just a fragment of one, and they're seeing parts of certain ones that appear a certain way because of the planetary grid distortions. For 25,000 years, the grid distortions have been here. What's interesting is because of the planetary grid distortions, you can go back and dig up a dinosaur and take DNA from that, and it will read as a base 4 genetic alphabet, because the frequencies that allow certain chemical elements to bond and form and stay bonded and formed are literally dissolved because of what's happened in the planetary grids. We have on this planet naturally a variable base genetic alphabet. That means different sets, different amounts of chromosomes per different species. Right now, everything on this planet, not just humans, has been genetically mutated because of the reversals, the electromagnetic field reversals that have been done to these grids. We get into that more in the Templar book. But as far as DNA, one thing that's important to understand about it is that we have a dormant 12-strand pattern minimum. If you're in a body that looks like a human, you have a minimum of a dormant 12-strand pattern. Now, if you happen to be an Illuminati that's in the body that looks like a human, and you don't know the difference because nobody ever told you that you were anything but a human soul, you would have something like that, but you wouldn't have a full 12-strand, but you could get it. That's what we get into Melchizedek ordinations for. It's not that the Illuminati races are damned. It's that they simply need certain types of help with their DNA template to get them where they can do ascension, go through stargates where they can get their consciousness back where it's working in the right way. But all of us are going to go through, so are the animals, DNA activations because of the frequencies that are coming into the planetary grids right now. When we begin to activate the 12-strand pattern, it doesn't immediately change the look on what the chemical DNA looks like. It's a slow process. What we're doing right now is people are getting little pulses, nanosecond bursts. Actually, they're like trillionths of nanosecond bursts of frequency that come through. They turn on higher parts of the template until the body cells can't hold any more of that frequency, then they shut it off. So you're not going to have a chemical manifestation in the DNA until that turns on, that particular part of the template turns on, like strand 4 turns on, and then holds in the body. Now, a person who had a full 4-strand sustained continual activation would still, if you looked at their DNA, they would still have 2 strands. But those strands would have more combinations of sugar and phosphate, combinations running down the sides, and they would have more groupings of base pairs. They'd have more genes within the same double-strand structure. So literally the strands don't end up with this starburst inside your gene code. It's actually layering, where you get more chemical components, more complex information, more complex molecules within the strands of DNA, more complex proteins and amino acids. So there's all these chemical things that are going to happen with our DNA as we go along, but it starts with template activation. That's what we're doing now. Template activation is crucial if you're going to go through a stellar activation cycle, even one that's going well, even if it was just the stellar activation cycle we had to deal with here. Our DNA has been so mutated because of the problems in the grids for the last 25,000 years that we would have all died of radiation poisoning by the time we got to the opening of the halls of Amenti Stargates in 2012, like it was originally supposed to do, which is accelerated, by the way. I'll get to that in a minute. Right now, we're in a process of the planet is triggering our DNA to activate. It's also triggering certain blockages to come up in our DNA that we're getting right out of the grids that go with the Jehovian seals and several other ones that aren't as nasty, but they're just as annoying, because these block your body's ability to do what it's supposed to be able to do to stay healthy as the frequency increases on the planet. People are going to start getting more heart problems, particularly with the Jehovian seals activating, because they all run down the left side of the body. They're going to get problems with the legs in here, with the veins. They're going to get problems with the neck. Thyroid is one of the first ones that starts to go wacky, because there are Jehovian seals that run down in through here, that manifest in here in the body, and they affect the function of the thyroid gland, which affects the function of how your body assimilates food and all sorts of things. It literally turns your chemicals into it has to do things that they're not normally supposed to do. When people go through this type of thing, and it tends to work a little different between men and women, women have a propensity to start putting on weight because of the Jehovian seals activating in the body. Where I'm watching it happen with my body and going, "Yeesh," like it makes you feel like you're out of control of your body, because your body's doing stuff. You can starve yourself to death and you still gain weight. This is men. It affects in different ways also. So we are being affected physically on the inside by these things most of us don't know about. DNA templates, they're activating, seals that are stuck in the DNA templates. When we work with the techniques that we're going to work, tomorrow's going to be more of the technique day. You got some of it this morning, and I'm glad, because I heard that you were doing the salutations, and what else? Did salutations? Tryon feels excellent. Okay, so that's good. Usually I would go into a full explanation of all that, and then we get into it, but I'm so glad glad. And I thank the people who helped with that this morning. So what I want to do is, first let's anchor it all in the mental body, which means let's make this make rational, logical sense. There was a sequence of events that took place here, obviously, that got us to the point where we are. And if we have this opposable, invisible set of groups of people that consider themselves our enemy, and it's like, well, we don't have to look at them as enemies. They're the ones that want to play enemy. But that doesn't mean we let them flatten us. But we need to know who they are. So I'm going to go through the handouts that you have. If you can't read it up here because it's really, like, it gets distorted at the bottom, they say the same thing as what's up here. And I'll just go over it a little bit, explain. Up on the first one we have the Omicron Draconians. All right, they're out of what's called the Fallen Seraphim line. I will tell you a little bit about where they all started from, okay? And this was a long time ago, and I'm not going to go through the whole history because we'll be here till next Tuesday. Okay, and not the first coming one, the next one after. The fallen angelic collectives started from some events that took place 250 billion years ago, literally, in a place called the Cradle of Lyra. The Cradle of Lyra is the Lyra, when we look up in the sky and we identify the Lyra star system. There are stars that what we see as stars there that have, just like all planets do, they have different density levels. Now, to get into a density level here, this is called density, this is density 1 down here, heavy density. There is density 2, 3, 4, and 5. And they progressively get lighter and lighter. This is the process by which consciousness goes from being primal light and sound into progressively manifesting into density. The place called the Cradle of Lyra, which when we look up and see our Lyra star system, that is the coordinate in our universe that all this started. The Cradle of Lyra was a pre-matter density system, which means it's the first step in going from being a waveform into taking on solidity where form shapes can be made, where you become part of a three-dimensional system that's not just consciousness in the form of light waves. All right. In the Cradle of Lyra, there were 3 primary founders races that seeded this time matrix, and literally all life forms in this time matrix came out of these 3 primary races. The 3 primary races were the Elohai Elohim, the Seraphai Seraphim, and the Brahmarama. Each one of those was connected to one of 3 primary consciousness collectives that form the density 5 primal light fields. The Elohai Elohim are called the blue flame group. The flame refers to the D13 level of the primal light fields, which are D13, 14, and 15 are primal light fields. D13 is actually the first individuation into light, where sound turns into light. So that actually has the highest coding, D13. They're called the blue flame groups. The Elohai Elohim were the first Christos founders races that came into density and pre-matter in the Cradle of Lyra. There's the gold flames, which are the pale yellow light fields of D14. And there's what they call the violet flame groups, which are the it's like a pale magenta color, D15 light field. Now, these are consciousness fields, not just fields of light, but they're also the fields of energy that all forms of electromagnetic energy that we know in the density systems comes from, which implies energy is conscious, which it is. Okay? Now, where this whole mess began was with the Christos founders races. There's something that we call code convolution that began to take place. There were 3 different races of beings that were from 3 different consciousness collectives that agreed through something called the Emerald Covenant. And the emerald refers to the blue flames because it's actually blue-green. It's pale turquoise is the D15 or D13 color. So the Emerald Covenant was an agreement between these 3 founders races and their consciousness collectives that they would come in and they would have this would be a peaceful system. This would be a coevolution system where they would work together in harmony. It was supposed to be a nice place to live. They all created different types of races. The first set of races, the Christos founders races that were created, were the Elohai Elohim, and they were created on a planet called Aramatana, Lyra, at D12, dimension 12, in density 4. Now, Lyra Aramatana, when we look up, and our scientists look up, and they identify something called Lyra double-double, they call it the double-double. That is Lyra Aramatana. the ancient word is Aramatena for it. It's its actual tonal vibration put out into sound. That's where you get the words from the names of these places. That is where the D12 stargate was, the entry point into this particular system. There are 12 primary stargates between density 4 and density 1 that allow consciousness to come in, that allow manifestations to come in to create matter in these systems. So the Elohai Elohim of the Blue Flame group, the Emerald Order, were appointed as the guardian groups, the Christos Founders races, of Lyra Aramatena and Stargate 12. Still in Lyra, there was another place called Lyra Avion, which had the Gate 11, Universal Stargate 11. And this planet was shared by the Elohai Elohim, a group of them, and one of the Brahmarama groups, which were the Violet Flame groups. And then there was one more planet called Lyra Vega, which is still called Lyra Vega here in our star charts. That planet was given to the Seraphim. Stargate 10 was in that planet. Now, these guys got along for literally, this was 950 billion years ago that they were seated there. So they got along for a really long time, and things were going well. But something called code convolution started to happen, which you can compare to inbreeding. If you take one genetic line and start combining it with itself too long, you start to get distortions in its natural pattern. It works the same way on templates. Even when you're in density 4 and you're not dealing with chemicals as we know them here, you're still dealing with scalar wave templates. There were certain races that, because they were creating new life forms and new combinations of themselves to experience life in the densities, they began to have code convolution, which convoluted their consciousness as well. And warring started to break out between the Vegan ones at Gate 10 and the group of the Elohai Elohim that were stationed at Gate 11. There was a group of the Elohai Elohim that used to be, they were originally part of the good guy Elohim, that decided that they wanted to destroy the Seraphim of the Vega system. And they asked the High Council of Lyra Aramatena to say, to give them permission to go destroy them. And they said, no, you're not going to destroy them, because they were as screwed up as the ones they were trying to destroy. So we'll try to rehabilitate both of you and help both of you. Well, because the particular group of Elohai Elohim on Avion didn't like that answer, they blew up Aramatena at the time, the template for Aramatena. They got rid of the founders, the High Council, so they could take over, and then they went after the Seraphim. Now, the group that went into rebellion and decided it was going to be its own little creator god, and it was going to create its own universe by taking over this one, they were called the Anu Elohim. And they're the ones that created later the Anunnaki races. The Anunnaki races were created for one purpose, to get rid of the races that were created by the Christos founders that had been sent in here in order to fix things. The human race was the race that was created to fix things. They were called the Oraphim, and that's what humans are. They're Oraphim Turinicium, and it's a Lyran Syrian race form. So this whole mess and this whole Phantom Matrix stuff started literally 250 billion years ago in the warring that broke out between the different Elohim races. And we ended up with fallen Anu Elohim that came out of the Elohai Elohim originally, and we ended up with fallen Seraphim, which were the ones from the Vega system that also ended up going. Literally, they got sucked into a black hole system, and they reassembled themselves there, and then progressively have tried to pull in portions of this time matrix and its galaxies into their system to feed off it. And they have come very, very close at certain times to literally taking the whole thing in. They're very close to that right now. It helps a little bit, too, to have a basic understanding of these Christos founders races, what they look like. What types of forms did they create? When we talk about reptilian races, all of the reptilian races came out of the Seraphi races. The Seraphi had a few primary forms. They had reptilian, dragon-like, insectoid, and avian, bird forms. So those primary forms were set. And like literally things, when we see them run around here, if you see little lizards or birds flying in the air, these are things that have been created through that matrix. They're not all negative. There are good Seraphi that haven't fallen as well. And when you look at the old angel text, they talk about the Elohim and the Seraphim and these guys. What they usually don't tell you is about the trouble back in Lyra, because usually the ones that have written the angel books here in the last 10,000 years have been the Anu Elohim, which are the ones that are trying to take over. So this whole mess literally started back there. So when we look at who's playing in the game now, and you see the little categorizations of fallen Seraphim, of Vega Lyra, that first affiliation that's in up here, like in the parentheses, that refers to where they basically started where that race started, and then the other affiliations as far as where they are and where their primary like cultures and civilizations are the ones that are listed outside of the brackets. So that's the drama so long ago in linear time that all of this mess has come out of, and this is just like a piece of a mess within a much larger mess. In the Amenti book, the Voyagers Volume 2, Secrets of Amenti, the first printing that came out in '99, we were given the information on what was called the fall of Terra. Earth used to be called Terra. In fact, Earth still is called Terra in density 2, which is dimensions 4, 5, and 6. It's the counterpart to this planet in density 2. Terra was almost blown up completely because of the same battle that was going on between the same races. So this is not a new story, but we're in this particular leg of the story where it's the closing act, because at this point it's going to go one way or the other, because the other time matrix, the phantom matrix, has accreted or pulled in so much frequency that it has more frequency right now than this one does. That's why, in order to create enough frequency to literally pull this time matrix and this planet back into its natural order of things, we need to link it to two other time matrices to literally give it anchoring rods, or it will be drawn into the black hole system. That's what we're doing now. There's a whole progression of history that's given in the Templar books there that takes you back through Atlantis. It actually takes you back through the whole seeding 3. We didn't get into seedings 1 and 2 in that book. That was in the Secrets of Amenti book. So, I mean, if you want history, if you want detail, it's here. But what's important now is understanding what the heck has happened to us since 1916. How in the world could our politics, how could this stuff be going on without us even seeing it? That's what amazes me. Is there's this picture painted for us through media and through what you get taught in school from the time you're small and you go to school. We're taught to look at the world a certain way. What we're not taught is literally for 70 years there have been ET contracts here that have been controlling everything, including what the media was allowed to release. What we're not told is that certain races are walking among us that aren't even human, and some of them are having a terrible time not showing that because their DNA is activating too and they're starting to morph, where people are literally seeing lizard people. Like, it'll be like a flash on that comes out. I know one person who's a UFO investigator, a famous one, called me and she says, "Do you know anything about this?" I've had like numbers of calls from people all over the place, like different countries, the United States. One was a senator's daughter, and she said, they're saying that, well, for example, she said, the senator's daughter, when I was in the room with my dad, I walked in the room, and he had his back to me, and I say, "Oh, hi, Dad," and he turned around, and she scared the hell out of me. He was a lizard in a suit, literally. She saw her dad morph, and then he turned back around and morphed back real quick, but she literally, she took off, she left town, won't let them know where she is, and terrified the daughter, which is going to be even more scared to find out if she has part of those codes. You know what I mean? Yeah. So we're not told about this when we go to, world cultures, when we go through civics class and, in grade school and things where they teach us about who else lives on the planet with us. They leave out a few races that are actually here. So at this point, we need to realize that we have been a multi-species planet, and I'm not just talking about animals and plants and humans. The things that are in human bodies, all humans are not the same. It's not a value judgment of who's good and who's bad. Illuminati races that right now, it's really kind of good because most of them don't know that they're anything different than what a human might be, whatever that is. They have an innocence about them because of that, but they're also extremely vulnerable to manipulation because they have those DNA windows that the fallen angelic groups can just go right in with psychotronic pulsing, or they can go right in for possession into their biofields. If they can use Maharic Seal, Illuminati races can get out of the problem. This is what the Guardians tried to explain to them in the 1930s when they were making treaties with the Zetas, and there was literally physical contact made with some of the Guardian groups, and they came in and said, "Hey guys, you really don't want to do this." They tried to show them about the wormholes because they already knew that the things were happening with the wormholes because the Zetas had popped through them. And they had their own little twists of power and conquest, and they didn't want to release their power over the masses, and that's really what blinded them to make some bad decisions. Yes?
So, somebody who is a reptile, by choice, by using these seals, can they advance?
Yes, they can.
Okay, and what about people who are, when you look at the robotic, what about them?
The robotic type ones? Usually the little Robotrons are more like cloned versions. Like the original is usually gone by then. They do clone. They've been cloned. The Zetas have been cloning since the 30s. And there are some political people that fall into that category in different countries. And it's kind of like, there's one little interesting way that you can sometimes get a hint that something like that might have happened, or either like it's a Roboton person, they have this really dead look in their eyes. Now that can happen with full field infiltration, not just cloning. If somebody gets their body snatched, which is happening all over the place. Like if you look at some of the photos of some of those terrorist people, it's like falling into black holes when you look through those eyes. There's no conscience in there. Now, those guys weren't Robotons. They weren't something created through cloning. They were once Illuminati human beings that didn't know they were Illuminati human beings. They didn't know consciously about ETs or any of that. But they had the genetic code that made it very easy for the dark avatar collectives from densities 4 and 3, which are the pre-matter densities and the semi-etheric matter densities. They can move their consciousness into those body forms and use them as a host, and that's what they very often do. When you see that stare where you look like you're falling into black holes in people's eyes, that is a possession. That is a sign of possession. It's a little different with the Robotrons. They almost look like cutouts. There's something about the way that the cloned ones feel. They don't feel like they're quite here. Like their bodies don't feel like the same density as ours, even though they look like it. And there's more of a mechanical thing. It's almost like they remind me of little cutout, you know how little girls play with cutout paper dolls? They have a paper doll feel to them compared to what even a possessed body would. But we're on the planet with all these people. And what's scary is like that one girl found out. It could be your dad. You don't know. We don't know who we are here because that knowledge, we've been denied that knowledge. So we don't know if we're from a family line that is caught up in this, where if we knew, run our Maharic seals, we don't have to play that game. There's a lot of very good people that I have met that are incarnated out of the fallen angelic matrices. And they don't know that they are, and they get manipulated all over the place, but some of them have developed enough consciousness here where they say, okay, let me learn this Maharic seal thing. And boy, does that really upset the fallen angelic matrices, because they're losing their own. They're losing their little potential body snatch vehicles down here. So what we try to teach with all of this, it's not a hatred game at all. It's realizing that the Illuminati have been victimized here, and they can do some horrible things to other people when they're being victimized. They can make some really bad decisions, and they can be awful. I mean, when you look at some of the things like the Taliban groups do, or other groups that literally torture people and seem to enjoy it, Illuminati can do this because they don't know any better, and because they're lacking the 12th strand imprint, which means they can't plug into that Christos consciousness, that feeling of being connected to the rest of the universe. So they honestly, a lot of them just don't feel what we call remorse, what a human would feel as compassion for another being. It isn't there. When people like that get into love relationships, they tend to be the vampires in the love relationships, where they feed emotionally off the other person, but it's very shallow, where it's not a real genuine connection, where they look at like women as symbols, or women as objects, or the women look at the men as objects. This whole type of relationship that's become very predominant in our societies on the planet is literally the type of relationships that people that don't have the 12th strand begin to have with each other. And we've started to fall into those patterns because they were all around us in the cultures. Yes?
I saw an interview on television months ago, and a recent U.S. News and World Report interview of the founder of the Raelian religion, who openly states that he's cloning. Did the Guardians...
The Raelians? Are they the ones up in Canada? I had a run-in with one of theirs. These are Necromaton beetle people, okay?
Is that going to have anything to do with what we would be doing to stop this? Or it has nothing to do with all of it?
There's all sorts of those agendas running. They all have their negative ones all have their own little agendas. I had a run-in with one of the Raelians before I knew who they were on a UFO panel. It was my first UFO panel. Yes, yes. Oh, what a nightmare that was. We had, I swear, it was like the United Nations of the fallen angelic realms on that panel. And this one Raelian lady is she... we're with the Elohim, and the Elohim, well, they're our creators, and they're so good because, well, we know they're more superior than us because their sciences are so advanced and their technologies, and they're going to come in and they're going to show us how to be. And I'm thinking, oh, gag me, And meanwhile, I'm watching this frequency. I could feel it going into the room, and she spoke in a monotone. and it was doing something to the people in the room. I could feel it. There was like literally a subliminal frequency going through, and I started to get, my hair started to stand on end on my arms, and what the hell was that? You know, she may be a sweet, pretty looking little Canadian lady, but what is going on over here? And I closed my eyes, and I got this flash of this thing that looked like a hominid beetle, literally like the kind of fat beetle bodies, and it was gold colored and had a really ugly head on it. I didn't know what they were at the time. That's a necromaton race strain, an Andrami necromaton race strain. There's several different looks that they have, but that was one of them. And they were running this whole program. There was another one that was doing toning in a healing session, same expo, but this was the healing panel, where she came up and she was doing these tones, and it was really funny because she had a song called The Song of Orion. That was the name of the one I was doing too, and I thought it was really weird. So, gee, maybe we're on the same team. She starts this song, and I didn't know her. I mean, yeah, I had nothing against the lady, and I'm listening to these tones, and again, my hair is like standing on end, and I closed my eyes to see what's going on in the room, and I saw these Dracos, which are one of the reptilian lines coming in, cording people in the room. So we came after her and did our Song of Orion, and we saw the cords drop. So there is stuff going on here that is utterly amazing. You start to find it when your fourth strand starts to kick in, and you need to know you're not losing your mind when you start to see it. You're not having hallucinations. But think about it, how the program is set up out here. Okay, a person starts having DNA activation. They start to get weird perceptions. They start to see lizards in suits. They start to see spaceships hanging up there in the sky with their inner vision, not their eyes, right? They go to somebody because they're scared. They go to, say, a mental health professional. Where do they go? They get the railroad. They get put on something to make it go away. The system is set up. It's a snare to make sure that we don't activate, and if we do, they'll give us a nice chemical to make sure it goes away. This has all been set up for this time. And at this point, there's not a lot of time to haggle about it. I spent a while, when I first started coming out with information, it was mild compared to this. We didn't talk about the scary stuff until it had to be talked about. You know, we talked about some of the conflicts, but we didn't focus on Illuminati stuff. We had better things to do. Teaching about the healing, teaching about the DNA, what to do to prepare ourselves for stellar activation. But from the moment I stepped foot into the speaker's arena, I swear, everybody was out to get me. I came in with an open heart and a loving mind. Oh, you know, we're all on the same team. We're all going to be light workers. Yeah, right? It was everywhere I turned around. There were people that looked like nice people that were trying to implant stuff into my fields, trying to send frequencies at me. It was amazing. It's been a battleground out there for a while now, and I just didn't realize it. You know, so we're all walking through this, and as long as we're stuck in the D3 mindset, they won't bother us directly because we're controllable. Because we're easy that way. It's when we start to get hip to things that they start to say, aha, you know, got to clamp down on that one. At this point, there's a lot of people waking up, and they haven't been able to clamp down on everybody. We've managed to get a huge amount of information through, and even more than the information, a huge amount of frequency, which means we've gotten enough frequency on planet that the indigos and the humans are starting to wake up on the natural DNA imprint that they're supposed to. They're still going to have problems running with the frequencies running through the grids. They're still going to get sick if they don't learn to run Maharic Seal. However, we can help people by learning to do this ourselves. The more frequency we bring into our bodies, the more we straighten out our DNA and hold that, the more it will be the pattern, the critical mass pattern in the race morphogenetic field. It's called the race template. So we can literally, by healing ourselves, literally hold a field that the rest won't end up with accelerated cancer and accelerated heart disease and accelerated liver disease, because these are all the things that are going to accelerate because of the blockages that are there. So in the work that we do, we're helping all of that. Now, I'm going to get back to this, though. I want to get back to, so we can get through this, so we can get to the fun part. The fun part was those 7 pages that I just haggled through. I had to go through the whole text that I got to get the timeline. I wanted to see the timeline for me, too. Okay, what happened first? What happened next to get us to this point? So I just want to get us familiar with the players, because you'll hear me talk about them a lot. And you may, at least you have them in your hand if you know, who was that again? Right? You basically have Anunnaki agendas, Andromi agendas, Draconian agendas, Draconian reptilian agendas, several different kinds of Anunnaki agendas. But what honestly has made the whole thing much easier is they finally all decided to stop fighting with each other and join up into the United Resistance. So now we don't have to track 20 different agendas. We just follow the main one. There's a couple little rebel groups. The only other rebel group you really have to worry about are the Omicron Draconians, because they're trying to fight the United Resistance and everybody else. But it's really made things much simpler. All of these agendas that are like these affiliations that have their own agendas have come together through the United Resistance, put all their technologies together, and are trying to make a stance against the guardian nations. But it makes it easier to track what they're doing, because now they don't all go do stuff off on their own where you have to keep track of everybody. Now they have central command, which is the Andromes. Okay, the Necromaton Andromes are basically central command in all of this, with their little leaders in each of the different race groups. So we have the Omicron Draconians. These are bipedal, which means, you know, standing up, kind of not quite hominid. They would be hominid if they had anything that resembled human form. The only thing that resembles it is it's bipedal. It has 2 legs, 2 armed things, and they're dragon moths. All right? They look like something you'd see on the Sci-Fi Channel. Some of them are tall. They can be, you know, 8 to 9 feet tall. Some of them are shorter. Their little worker drone things are shorter, and they're usually the ones that if anybody has encounter with them, they usually see the shorter ones that are about the size of a human, a little bit bigger. Yeah. Then there's little tiny things that they use that are just like clone things. They use like little Zetas and all sorts of other things. Now, these guys are nasty but dumb, which is nice. I mean, you know, they have negative agendas, but they're like all brawn and not too much brains, because they have 10-strand DNA potential. They don't have 11-strand potential like the Anunnaki races do. So these are the ones that are pushy. These are much more direct. If they want to go blow something up, they will. They won't manipulate you and kiss up to you and be your best friend while they're, you know, nailing you behind your back. These guys will just be your enemy, and at least you know it. So that helps. It makes things easier when you're dealing with these guys, because they're pretty much in your face. Now, I don't underestimate them. I mean, they're capable. They're using multidimensional spectrum. They can do a lot of damage. They've been tracking me since I was born in this lifetime. They haven't got me yet. The Odedicron reptilians. Now, these are a different group. The Omicron Draconians are from Alnitak and Alnilam Orion in the Phantom Matrix. Okay, they have primary race affiliations. Now, this stuff, the Leviathan race affiliation, when I talk about Leviathans, I talked about it a little bit yesterday. These were the hybrids that started out as a hybridization program, Emerald Covenant hybridization program to help these races back in the Atlantean period. It actually started 155,000 BC was when the hybridization program began. The Leviathan races that came out of the tribe, the hybrid tribe of Levi, were supposed to be a good thing, but they got taken over. So when I have this primary Leviathan race infiltration, these are the races that were infiltrated. If we see a race now that is descendant of that, they're the Illuminati versions in these race lines. Now, most of the race lines that are listed are angelic human 12 tribes. They were original human races, but they have certain portions of them that have been infiltrated by a Leviathan race to create an Illuminati line. And that Illuminati line is associated with different things. Each one of them have their own kind of certain areas of the globe and areas of the human populations that they infiltrated. So if we look at the Omicron Draconians, we have their primary Leviathan affiliations are Middle Eastern races, German races, Germany, Anglo-Saxons, Italian, Asian. They're called the Hala King Leviathan lines. Hala, Allah. Okay, this is where the distortions on what used to be a decent religion before they took it over, Islamic religion, the Muslim religion, was actually one of the translations, and it didn't look anything like it does now, was originally one of the translations of the Angelic Human 12 Tribes CDD plates. But they were infiltrated in the Atlantean period before the 9558B flood of Atlantis. And this is called the Hala, Leviathan King lines. They were the group of hybrids that were, Illuminati hybrids that were taken into this particular agenda by the Omicron Draconian group, and Omicron soul started to incarnate into them. And they are the ones that distorted the teachings that now when you look at Islam, most of it was written by them at this point. You also have the same problem in Christianity, because most of Christianity was written by the Jehovah and Elohim at this point, because they did the same thing. What has happened here, since it started in Atlantis, and it got really bad after they orchestrated the 9558 BC fall of Atlantis to make it all disappear, literally every race line here of the 12 tribes has been compromised, where there has been an Illuminati Leviathan race sent in that were the incarnates of one of the fallen angelic lines that began to progressively interbreed and try to take over the race line. They would, in the old days, you didn't believe in the creed they were feeding you, you got killed. Simple as that. They would literally raid, and they would very often rape the women in order to make them pregnant. so they would be able to further their line and pick up more human coding as they went. We have lived a Holocaust since Atlantis, and the scary part is we have no memory that we even did that because it's been such a good con job. So basically you'll find this affiliation of the Omicron draconian agendas all over in the Middle Eastern areas, some of them collectives in Germany. In the Anglo-Saxon lines there are some. In the Italian, particularly Roman lines, like the Romans were there are actually two groups of Romans. One were a whole group of Leviathans that came in and took over on behalf of the Anunnaki, and the other were the ones that came in and took over on behalf of the Omicron Draconians. The Roman Catholic Church was founded by the Omicron Draconians. The Protestant churches were a rebellion against that by the Anunnaki. It breaks my heart because these are the things, the only little grains of spiritual identification that we have had left to grasp, to keep a hold on our concept that we have a God someplace, that we're part of something larger. They have infiltrated the spiritual and the holy teachings. They've put their own names on them and their own agendas. That's why with the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, how they used to go kill everything that didn't agree with it, it was a political machine. They have all been. What they have done with Islam is the same thing. It is a political machine. And boy, do some of them like to play that to the hilt like they're doing right now, like the Taliban. The Taliban are in trouble because they didn't want to join the United Resistance, because who's incarnated in Taliban bodies are the Omicron Draconians, most of them. And right now they're not very popular because they're not joining the United Resistance. So, United Resistance, Illuminati races, are going to be motivated to make sure they go away. You're going to find some house cleanings like this happening in other countries, like in Iraq. If Iran doesn't behave itself, they'll go there too. What you're watching is a fighting between races, even fighting between groups within, say, take Afghan, the Afghanis. They've been fighting with each other. If they don't fight with something else, they're fighting with each other. That's because there's several different groups of Leviathan races there and a bunch of humans thrown in among them. The humans usually get caught in the crossfire because it's usually the Leviathan races that end up in positions of political control. Why? Because they take it. All right, they fight, they kill things until they get themselves in power. And that's how they got in power in our country too. Our country was founded by Leviathan races, and that's unfortunate. But we were founded by the Freemason Illuminati movement. If you look back into records that they have on who George Washington was affiliated with, who Thomas Jefferson was affiliated with, our wonderful founding fathers. Now, there were good guys here. They didn't know half of the stuff they were affiliated with. Some of them did, but not to a heavy degree, but they knew they were Freemasons. And they knew that was a mystical society that withheld certain knowledge that had to do with Atlantis, that had to do with ancient Egypt. They withheld it from the general populations, and they used it in a lot of little psychic tricks that they picked up along the way to mess with people. They would have a thing where they'd come up and they'd say, "Hello, how are you?" And they'd just tap you on the shoulder. You got implanted. They knew how to do this consciously. All right, there are things in our history that we don't realize. America was a good country. It was intended to be a good country. It was going to be a battleground from the start because you had Magi Grail lines here that were holding down the fort since Atlantis. Some of the American Indian lines were Grail line, Angelic Humans, and Indigos that were here to hold down the fort. That's why everybody tried to get rid of them. Who tried to get rid of them? The two competing lines that came over. You had your Anunnaki Freemason lines that came over from Europe, and you had your Draconian lines that came over from Europe, fighting with them. We can take it right into the Civil War. We had the Yankees and the rebels. At that point, you had the Yankee Anunnaki and the rebels down south with the Drac agenda. But these are people that get motivated by certain little groups that are in front of them. Most of them are humans, but they end up following Illuminati agendas because Illuminati get themselves positioned through birthing into certain family lines to keep themselves in power positions. So literally all of our political events have been connected to this undercurrent of what's going on in the Illuminati races. So this is some of the stuff that's affiliated with here. I could have gone further on these, but I didn't have time where we could take it right down into who does the Course in Miracles and who does this and who does that. Because literally everything out there on the bookshelves, particularly the channeled stuff, is attached to somebody, to one of these agendas. Some of them are decent ones. Some of them used to be good ones until they broke the Pleiadian-Sirian agreements in 1992. Then they decided that they were going to take the in that they had with humans and take it in a different direction. So at this point, you look around and you say, gosh, it's not just the old holy books that have been compromised, but the stuff that's coming through that we started to trust. Oh, the New Age movement, finally, it's going to get us out of the dogmas of the old stuff that we could feel the dogma was not right, right? Then there's this whole line of stuff coming out. UFO movement, New Age movement. That's the new infiltration angles coming from both sides. Total polar opposites meeting in the middle in mainstream. Now, the Adedicron reptilians, these guys aren't as bad as the Omicron Draconians. They're more reasonable. Draconians just want to dominate, and they will just move through and push through and stomp on anything that's in their way to do it whenever they can. But because they don't have that 11th strand advantage that their competitors, the Anunnaki, have, they tend to get themselves stepped on a lot, because the Anunnaki are strategists. They think more into how to get things, where they'll wrangle things around, and they'll set things up where they have like races they don't want in their way take care of themselves and get themselves out of their way. The Draconians are just more direct. They'll go in and invade and try to take you over, where the other ones that think, they win with their brain and they position things, tend to wipe out the Draconian races a lot. You see this kind of fighting in the Middle East all the time. It's usually between the different factions of the Adedicron and the Omicron and some of the Anunnaki groups, constantly trying to kill each other. Our whole history of war has been these guys trying to kill each other, dragging human tribes around with them. Right, we have reptilian Odedicron. They're different. They're an avian reptile strain. They're from Alnilam, Orion, and some of the Omicron Draconians live on Alnilam with them also. Some of them get along with each other, some of them don't. So you'll see alliances between Omicron and Odedicron, and then you'll also see groups of Omicron and Odedicron that fight each other and try to kill each other. These guys, the associations down here are kind of interesting. You have in the Omicron Draconians, you have the Knights of Malta, which is an ancient group that came up, and it's still here. I think it's a family line. You have the KKK. Now there's other ones affiliated with KKK too, but the Ku Klux Klan guys, these guys are affiliated with those. Roman Catholic, Islamic religion, certain factions. Now, the majority of the Roman Catholic thing has been taken over by Omicron Draconian. They've been running for 100 years now, Draconian agenda, and the Anunnaki completely got kind of squeezed out of that whole deal. Where before they had certain holdings within it. The Knights Templar used to work with the Roman Catholic Church, but then they got into it. Knights Templar are Anunnaki. So at this point, you have Draconians running the Catholic Church. Now, the poor Pope doesn't know this. He doesn't have access to this information, and they're certainly not going to tell him. Why? Because he's a pope on a string. People are puppets here to these guys, and they follow ancient books, and they praise this God and that God, say a bunch of prayers in different languages that they think they know what they mean. They don't know. When you say tones, you're doing stuff to your DNA. You're activating DNA or implants. They've been having people do prayers, and you know how the Islamic people have been taught to worship a black cube that's sitting out in Mecca and to do all these sound tones repeatedly. What they're doing is reinforcing the reversed codes that their race has picked up from being infiltrated by the Draconians. The people don't realize this, and that's what's so sad about it, because Muslims are trying to be good people and to serve God. Christians are trying to be good people and to serve God. Buddhists are trying to be good people and to serve God. They have taken a core human desire and instinct, which is to know the self and to be a part of the universe and know your place within it. And they have abused us with it, and they have abused it. That's why it's important that, I really like this group, because none of you have gone into that. Some people get really defensive. Like, I'm not going to listen to anything you have to say unless you tell me that God's name is Jehovah, or unless you tell me that Christ died on the cross. You're wrong if I'm not going to listen to anything you say. You're definitely wrong if you won't tell me Christ died on the cross. Fine, have your Savior crucified if it makes you happy. But I mean, it takes courage to let go of what we've been programmed to believe and to use our brains finally and say, look at what's been done here. How dare anybody come in and take the most sacred aspects, our gene code, our bodies, our planet, and our sacred spiritual teachings, and do what they have done here. It's enough to say, okay, maybe I don't like this, and I'd rather believe in something like Love and Clueless that feels happier. But it creates a core spiritual anger that's not a rage that you'll hurt people with. It's a commitment and a conviction that there is a right and there is a wrong somewhere. And something about this is very wrong. So it gives you a strength where you say, I'm going to find progressively as I go through me, through my connection with Source, what that rightness is. And I am not going to let the wrong run my life anymore. And if that means I'm going to stand up to a bunch of people who are controlling this planet, you're not going to stand up and be a terrorist. You're not going to stand up and go kill people. That's not the way to work it. You stand up and do what humans were here to do, which was run frequency. Peacefully, lovingly, because that's what will fix it. But it gives you the commitment when you see how the amazing story. I mean, when we're watching Leave It to Beaver back in the 50s, boy, it wasn't Leave It to Beaver. We had X-Files going on right underneath it in our real life. So we're watching Leave It to Beaver, and like the Cleavers and everybody's getting along really nice and hunky-dory, perfect little family, nuclear family program. And meanwhile, we have Zed has taken over the government. You have the government, the United States itself, breaking the Constitution progressively, using the banking systems, messing with the banking laws, taking over the Treasury, making a private interest corporation out of what we call the Federal Reserve. This stuff is unconstitutional. Nobody bothered to notice. So is forcing you to pay taxes. Nobody bothered to notice that either. But are these things worth standing up and getting yourself in trouble for, fighting? No. You know why? Because you're taking on a Goliath that you can't take down that way, but it can step on you that way. Some things, it's like choose your battles carefully. If you want to make an issue on not paying taxes, let's say, because you're going to be a patriot, there's a whole movement about doing that. The patriot people are right. The government has broken the Constitution of the United States. Unfortunately, it's the government that upholds the law of the United States. What court you going to take them to? You know what I mean? And if you aggravate them enough and get enough people behind you to aggravate them more, what are they going to do to you? All of a sudden, you're going to find yourself with a very big tax bill. Or something. Yeah, really. Yeah, so it's like, why bother fighting the little battles? Because all you're going to do is get your energy drained and put yourself on a hit list. You don't have to fight aggressively in an anti-stance. What we need to do is realize we don't have to fight directly. What we need to do is run frequency, and that will accomplish the rest. It's kind of like standing and doing what we're here to do, not worrying about countering every move that the opposition is making. Get done what we need to do, and we will be successful here. And that's all it is. That's why if we approach it with love, when I look at, like, Mr. Bush and the other people that run the governments, I don't have anything against these people, even if they aren't human. Some of them are, some of them aren't. I don't really care. They're being played just as well. The people in MJ-12, which was Majestic 12, the first group of contactees in government places that was created in the 1930s, these people got involved with something over their head and ended up terrified. They realized that their treaties were totally nullified, and now they were the pawns of a bunch of ETs that literally terrified them. We need to not do the hatred thing, to point fingers, to blame. You want to blame somebody, point them this way, up toward these invisible things that have been flying around here for the last several 100,000 years that are messing with us, because that's where the blame is. And if you want to point blame past that, go back to gene codes that get messed up, and they weren't messed up on purpose. So you get blame is like a balloon that loses the air in it. There's no place to put it. It doesn't matter who did it, why they did it, whose fault it is. It helps you to understand so you know how to position yourself, what to look out for. But you need to realize, too, you can love everything in the universe, even the things that are acting horribly. If you look at them, especially like people that are parents, you know how if you have a child, and that child, you love that child to bits, but it does something really awful, really bad, you learn. And sometimes you might have like an Indigo 3 child, and they have lots of challenges with their gene codes, and they may do things all the time to drive you absolutely crazy, you and the teachers and anybody else around you. But you learn as a parent to not hate the child, but not condone the behavior. So there's a system that's usually used with children that you devise certain ways of, oh no, this is a boundary, excuse me, you are going to learn this boundary. You don't go killing them because they were bad. You don't lock them in a closet and torture them because they were bad. You realize the limitations of how much can they understand and how much they can't, and you try to devise a way to handle them individually, where you can say, all right, these are the behaviors we're trying to help you develop, and this is where you are. You try to find, and it's a horribly long process working with even children on that level. This is really the approach. If you're not going to drive yourself crazy and get all sorts of hatred going inside yourself, what's really important is to look at the Illuminati guys and even the fallen angelic guys. They're very intelligent, And there used to be a saying, forgive them for they know not what they do. Oh, yes, they do. They know exactly what they're doing. They're doing it on purpose. But to do things like they do on purpose requires a sickness. It requires mental illness. And that's what they're dealing with. You can be brilliant and a genius and be psychotic at the same time. And that's what we're dealing with these guys. So it helps you if you can start out on that level right there, where you don't have to say, I'm going to hate these guys, I'm going to blame them, go get them. That's not the solution. The hate's going to be in you, and it's going to bring more of them and their negativity to you. If we can approach it like realizing we're healers on this planet. Humans were put here as healers, and these were a group of very sick beings. Now, right now, the very sick beings are like the psychos that took over the hospital. And somehow the hospital, or planet Earth, has to be brought back under control, or they're going to blow up the hospital and take it over and use it in their matrix. So you can't just say, oh, well, I'll let them just be and let them walk all over you and give you field implantation and con you every time they open their mouth, because this is the type of stuff you'll get from people who are possessed by them or people who are working with them. So it's a very fine balance. Now, when we go through the other groups we get to get into, it gets really confusing. When you get into the Anunnakis, the Anunnaki are one of the most diversified race groups. They have whole bunches that don't like each other. There's the pure strain ones. We were the first created, and then you guys got mixed with that over there. We don't like you. They're like race supremacists. They think they're better Anunnaki than the other ones because of their gene code. I mean, we get into some of this wild stuff. So we have, I'll go through these a little bit quicker. We have Omicron Draconian. We have Odedicron Reptilian. Okay? The APIN systems they go with. The Dragon APIN system. Implant in the grids, little microchip, hardware actually, it's more hardware than software, that's put in the grids. They have a matrix called the Dragon, and tomorrow I will have the drawings done that show you some of the main ones on the map as far as where they extend. And if you were coming in from outer space in a spaceship that had photoradionic detection scanning equipment, which is a type of physical equipment, you would be able to see them light up, and they would look like the forms. Like literally the ball of the Earth would be stretched out flat like a map, and you would see the diagram that literally shows their faces sometimes. All right, so they have the Dragon, and that one has a very strong influence all through China and going through Japan and Mongolia, and it always has. These were put in the Atlantean periods, anywhere from 25,500 BC up to 10,500. Okay, BC. So, okay, down here the Odedicron reptilians, they tend to work with the Zeta races that are down below them, and they use the Falcon APIN system, which is primarily the Zetas. The Zetas created it, but the Odedicron reptilians tend to use that one. Sometimes they'll work with the Omicrons and use the Draconian, but they more so like to work with the Zetas. Now, the Odedicron reptilians are avian reptile. Think kind of like gargoyle. You know, the gargoyle things, kind of like reptiles with these wingy things. Think about bats with longer legs, things like that. Reptile bats with long legs. Yeah. What's really funny is you can start to see these things when you go. UFO conferences are the greatest places to do it. If you want to try out your D4 vision, put up your Maharic seal and go to one of these places and just hang out in a lobby where you see the different speakers roaming around and stuff. And close your eyes and see if you can see better. You will be amazed. It is literally like the United Federation of Planets right there. You see things that you never thought a thing could look like that. There's little short things, there's fat squat things, there's big tall things. Some look like dragons, some look like insects, some look like beetles. It's amazing what you start to see. And you also start to see some that look like very tall, lean humans. They're the Iani. They hang around with some of us too, but you won't find them hanging in people's fields like possession. You might find them hanging out over their shoulder, like standing over here, which means you have a guardian crew with you. I do that a lot. I've had people say, I saw them behind you, because I wouldn't doubt it, because they hang out there sometimes. So now when you get into, if you start seeing something that looks like an upright dragon moth, you'll know you're dealing with somebody who has an Omicron Draconian with them. If you're dealing with Odedicron Reptilian, you would see something that was more short and squat. They kind of do this. They have this posture that's kind of weird. Their little butt sticks out, and they have little tails, and they bounce. They do. I mean, I've seen these things. I've seen people, seen them inside people that they possessed, and they're the weirdest looking little things. They're some kind of mutant reptile with wings that bounces. They're really interesting. And they have kind of like, what was that movie? Gremlins. Remember the Gremlin movie? Anybody remember that those kind of faces? They have faces kind of like that. I mean, these are the shapes they have. Not everything in the universe looks like us. You know, in fact, even we don't look like us when our DNA is working the right way. Humans are much taller. They're much leaner, like just a general lean type thing. There's less division in difference between male and female. We have difference, but it's not as pronounced as it is right now. And there's just a lot of things we look different when our DNA goes back to where it's supposed to be. Right now, we look more animal-like than we were supposed to, because there are certain things that are being repressed in the DNA template that create chemical combinations that aren't natural. Because there's certain pieces of the template missing, they create one chemical instead of another. So they've literally chemically altered us from the inside out. Right now, we resemble what's called Homo sapien 2, which is a mutation of Homo sapien 1, which came out of the Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon lines that were the original lines that were used. They're Anunnaki slave race that was used to create the hybridization program. So people who are of Illuminati descent actually did come out of the Neanderthal to Cro-Magnon to Homo sapien lineup, but humans didn't. So there's all these affiliations. We start to understand who the heck we are. And then we sit there and figure out, okay, who am I? Am I an Illuminati? Am I a human? What am I? It leaves a whole bunch of new questions. And the important thing to realize is it doesn't matter. It matters to know, but it doesn't matter. It's not a wrong versus right. You're not a bad person if you happen to have an Illuminati gene code. What it means is there's certain support you need for that gene code so the fallen angelics don't mess with you. And you can get what you need to be able to go into a Christos ascension pattern. It takes a little longer because you have to regenerate strand 12, where a human would come in with that imprint. But it doesn't mean that you're a lost cause, that you're a bad person, that you should feel guilty or lowly or pathetic, because you're not. You have the ability to become Christed too. Now, I know the people that come to these workshops. I don't think the only Illuminati I've ever seen come to these workshops came specifically for spying purposes. They were not there to learn, and you could tell very easily they weren't there to learn. They're just there watching me. All right? They were interested in the material. I've not had anybody interested in the material who actually said, I could do something with this. I haven't had any Illuminati do that yet. But they have told me that because of the game getting so close to the end of it, and the Illuminati are realizing that they're in big trouble, that they're just going to be, they're expendable, and they're going to kill them too at the end of this if they help them win it. There's a bunch of people of Illuminati descent who are going to be guided to, to this work. In order to, what's happening is their avatar levels are deciding they want to stay on this side of the Phantom Matrix. They're petitioning for redemption contracts. So they're going to guide their people into us. So people working with this, we need to understand that we need to be able to hold love in our hearts for the Illuminati people, because they're trying to, a lot of them are trying to get out too. And if we go in all Illuminati are bad, we're going to, we just have like this shut them out vibe. We're not going to help ourselves heal, and we're not going to help them either. Now, when we get to the, let's see, no, okay, I'll go down here to the Zeta Regalians. Now, the Zephelium word after that is called Zephelium, Z-E-P-H-E-L-I-U-M. That is the original race that what we call the little Zetas, those gray things, came out of. The gray things are a mutated version of it. It was created by cloning, because a long, long time ago, the Zephelium race, which were big blue things, they had big blue kind of squared off heads and strange-looking things, they had the equivalent of a nuclear war to the point where their whole race line was genetically wiped out. And what they did was they tried to continue their race line through cloning. And it progressively got more messed up and reduced the form, and it mutated the heck out of them, where they ended up being what we call the Zetas. And there's different types, those little gray things with the kind of funny-looking heads and the slanty eyes. They didn't originally start out looking like that. But the Zeta Regalians, there's various types of Zetas. Whole bunches of Zetas decided they didn't want to get involved with this big superpowers war that was building here in 1983, and they entered amnesty contracts and redemption contracts. They just wanted out. So the one group that was left is the largest group. They're called the Zeta Regalians. They're the most militant of the whole bunch. They run a draconian agenda. They're buddies with the Omicrons and the Odedicrons, and they're the ones that made treaties with our governments in the 1930s. Okay, and really have been running things since the 1930s until the 1970s came up, when the Anunnaki started giving them a run for their money again. Okay, let's say the Zetas had created in I think 10,500 BC. They created the Falcon APIN system, and they're the one. They created the Falcon wormhole, and then they created the Falcon APIN system to work from the Falcon wormhole. That was created in the period that's called the Luciferian conquest of 10,500 BC. That was still Atlantis before they made Atlantis disappear. Okay? These guys, some of the things they're affiliated with, it's interesting. Their associations, a thing called the Thule Society, which is still a society that runs here. All right, Thule Society, anything affiliated with the Aleister Crowley metaphysical teachings, anything affiliated with the Black Sun mystical schools, Golden Dawn mystical schools, the Enochian Watchtowers mystical schools, the Nazi movement, metaphysical pagan ideology distortions. They got into a bunch of the different, like some Wiccans and different pagan movements. They infiltrated different versions of them. So not all the pagan movements are just associated with them, but they are one of the things they infiltrated. They work closely with the Necromaton and Dramies and with some of the Omicron Draconian and Odedicron reptilian groups. So they work with these guys and also the Necromaton that we'll get into down here. These were those, what was the name of that group, Florence, that we're talking about from Canada? Raelians, right.
You know what they said? You had to give money in order to go to heaven.
Yeah, right. Yeah, pay at the gate, I guess. I could do without that heaven, thank you. Yeah, these guys are really out there. But they're so, like, wacky that they're easier to spot than some of the others because they don't act normal, and they don't look normal, and they speak in a monotone voice, like they're on Thorazine, you know? Okay. But, all right. So when we get down here, there's another group here. And it's funny, I won't name names because it's useless to really do that to a big degree. But I could literally tell you, if you look at the speakers' rosters in New Age conferences and in UFO conferences, I could tell you which group each of those speakers was involved with. And I have been very disheartened to find that in the 2 years I've been on the circuit, I haven't found one of ours yet. There were two that were supposed to be affiliated with us that were already taken over by, one of them was Draconian, one of them was an Anunnaki group. So that's where I figured, like, can I get out of here now? When I started to see what was happening here, teams I knew were supposed to be backup, where we were supposed to work together, Anunnaki teams, went south, and they were standing, working agendas counter to what we were working. So I haven't found anybody, but if I find any major movement out there that's doing the same thing we are, I will be very relieved. But at the moment, we're the movement, So, but there's a lot of us. I mean, they've already told us indigos. There are 550,000 indigos on planet. And they're not, most of them are not children. This is the wave of, like, the pre-wave of indigos. And we're getting a whole bunch more of the babies in right now. So there's a lot that go with this group. We're not alone here. They just didn't wake up yet. So I imagine we'll have bigger workshops in 2 years if the place is still here. Yes.
How could we be born in that soup of different races like this? How could the indigos be born out of parents that would carry the necessary code for us
what indigos do to get their template, just like these family lines have been going for thousands of years since Atlantis and before Atlantis, so have the Magi Gray lines, the indigo lines. All right, so we literally, when we're coming in as indigos, we choose our parents very carefully, not by because we liked you in the last incarnation, but by who has what codes. And they were, these gene lines were kept alive since the last, let's say, upgrade to the indigo gene code was done in 22,500 BC. And that's when the Eoni, they were called the Eoni indigos. They were the next upgrade, the highest upgrade of them. From that point on, even though most of them got massacred during the thing called the Eoni massacre, they were still certain groups that survived. And those groups would have children, and there were certain members of those groups who understood and who held the history. They had it in verbal tradition, and they weren't allowed to speak it because they get killed. But they knew who they were, and they protected their family lines and their race lines. There was a line that came up through the Celtics and Druidics. There was a line that came up through the Egyptians. There was a line that came up through a big line that came up through the Essenes. There was a line that came through certain of the Anglo-Saxon ones, actually, that literally purged out through having enough, interbreeding with enough of the right coding, literally got rid of the distortions that were in certain race lines. So they're here. That's how we can get born as indigos now into this alphabet soup of a mess that we call the human gene code, there are still specific family lines. The Illuminati do that too. There are Anunnaki lines here that have been kept pretty clear. There are draconian lines that have been kept pretty clear. One of the biggest invasion spots was the people of what are called the Hibiru race. Now, they're different from Hebrew. Hebrew and Hibiru are two different things. A Hebrew person is an angelic human. It was an angelic human cloister race line, which meant it combined two different angelic human races. One were called the Hibiru, and they were a root race strain, and they combined them with what was called the Melchizedek Cloister race line. That became the Hebrew race line. They had extra coding. They were like an advanced race line. Now, the Hibiru races were infiltrated by just about anybody that could get their hands on them. So you have these really interesting things happening with the people who call themselves Jewish, because there's various forms of what that means. Jewish is a faith, but most people that are taking their faith seriously, they realize that there's a real strong protection of the gene lines involved with the teachings of the Jewish faith. This is because they were supposed to be to keep certain race lines clear, and those weren't the teachings from the Emerald Covenant. They were the teachings of both the infiltration on the Anunnaki and the Draconian side. They were actually trying to keep the Hebrew people, they blended everybody into the Hebrew race, human race, overtook the identity and the teachings of the Hebrew peoples, called themselves Hebrews, but really you have Hibiru and Hyksos. And they're all calling themselves Jewish people right now. So this has happened in a lot of different things. I just wanted to point out to you what it's an alphabet soup. So there have been angelics and fallen angelics incarnating on this planet all along through their specified gene lines. And what's kind of interesting, if we can look at this whole drama, forget the word human, because right now it's a very misleading word. It's a word that's meant to cover up all sorts of truths so we can't figure stuff out. Let's go back to the word angels, because what is happening here is we have basically two divisions of races with lots of little divisions among them. One, angelics, and two, fallen angelics. They are basic categories of people that are here, because we were all angelic races of one sort or another, which means we came from other levels of density that were not always physically solid. And right now you have the guys working to do the Christos realignment mission, which is the mission of restoring the natural D12 pre-matter blueprint to the planet, so it will stop being raided by the Phantom Matrix people, and you have the ones representing Phantom Matrix. Within that symbol classification of angelics and fallen angelics, as far as who's inhabiting the planet, you have all of these different race strains. What's interesting to know is angelics and fallen angelics also incarnate as different types of plants, as different types of animals, as different types of minerals and chemical combinations. Yes. Right now, we are like a zoo on this planet. We have Anunnaki plants and animals. We have draconian plants and animals.
Within the same species? Within the same species?
Yeah. Yeah, like take birds, for example. All right?
Bad birds and good birds.
Yeah, but they're not really bad birds. They're genetically disadvantaged. I'm trying to find the politically correct term for that. You know what I mean? Challenge. Yeah, and that's what it is. I mean, you can't say that's a bad bird and that's a good bird. Yeah, but that bird that has a challenge in its genetic code and in its consciousnness may do things like, like attack other birds or like have a real carnivorous appetite, whereas the other types won't. You can sense in animals. If you think about it, take even dogs or take cats, basic everyday animals that people deal with a lot. You can take 10, line them up, go up and pet each one, and you will get a different feeling off each one. Some of them you'll find, oh, that feels like a lovey, sweet little cuddly one that's nice. That one feels kind of mean, or that one feels scared. You'll be able to feel these differences. And what you're feeling very often, you can get the same thing. You can look into a certain type of dog's eyes, and you will find that same blank stare that you get from the terrorist's eyes. You ever look in a shark's eyes? Those pictures they take underwater? They're not angelic human incarnates, that's for sure. They have one thing in mind: eat. Anything that crosses their path. That is a draconian form. The consciousness that forms most sharks is draconian. There have been a couple little upgrades put in there to try to help the sharks evolve into something higher. Dolphins, everybody thinks they're great, right? Everybody thinks, oh, the nice little dolphins, you can swim with humans. Well, half the reason most of the dolphins want to swim with humans these days is because the Anunnaki who live in them have been impulsing them to swim near humans, to be near them, so they can sonically mess with their DNA. Not all dolphins are like that. Some of the dolphins are out of the Founders Christos races. So you have to tell by feel, not by look, not by species. But it applies to everything. Think about the stuff you eat. About what plant, animal, derivatives you eat. You are taking into yourself, into your scalar template, a scalar template from something else. You are either going to help yourself be more human or more draconian or more Anunnaki by the substances you choose to eat and to use. Anyway, I didn't hear that. I think there are. Yeah, I can feel it with organic forms, right? But when it comes to these amalgamated chemical monstrosity foods that we've come to call just basic food and junk food and stuff, it's very hard to tell who the heck it belongs to, because it's like it mutated into its own form of something that wasn't before. And it's very hard to trace its original signatures. It doesn't mean you can't eat things like that. It means that when you're eating, it's very good to activate your D12 frequency, use your palm chakras, and beam at it for a little bit before you put it in, because it'll straighten out any distortions in the template. Then you're okay. But there's these things that people don't usually think about. You don't even think about, am I eating something draconian or am I eating something Anunnaki, you know? Yes? Uh-huh. Yeah. They're doing all sorts of things right now that are like, it's like the Atlantean horrors revisited, what's happening in the science community right now. They're doing the same things, combining stuff that they don't know, even things that help, that look like they're good, even things that save our lives, like organ transplants. You know, we're not against them. We don't take a stance against stuff in Azurite Temple. We point out what we know about it and whether it works in your system well or not, but we say it's up to you to do what you want with it. Organ transplants, for instance, is really, it's the same kind of concept as genetic engineering, where you're taking a piece of one thing, putting it in with a piece of another. You're combining two scalar templates that were not originally part of each other. They may or may not be compatible. Science plays with the outside, so they have no idea what they're doing with the scalar templates. Now, when it comes to organ transplants, they can save lives. But what you've done is you've taken on literally a part of the template of another person, which will include its karmic pattern, which will create a mutation in your DNA template, which may mean you have to incarnate over here, down here, to clear this in several other lifetimes. Most people don't realize that. We're so afraid of dying that we'll do anything to keep our bodies alive, because we forget where we go when we get out of them. God, if we remembered, we'd all be dead. We'd have run, you know, out of here. You know? What?
Blood transfusions? That was my question.
Blood yeah, they do the same thing.
But what if the opposite way? What if we, as we're doing our work, and we give blood and it goes into the body of the ones that don't have those?
Yeah, that helps. All right, but it's still, you can do it with energy. There's something about, and I'm not sure because I haven't opened the text files on it, but there was always a sacred thing about keeping your blood to yourself. And I don't mean to, like, take a stance, because I watch, like, when horrible disasters happen, like we had at the Trade Center. And a lot of people would have died if they didn't receive blood transfusions. That's why I don't take a personal stance on it. I would, in any given moment, knowing that, okay, this is going to, let's say I'm supposed to keep my blood to myself, and let's say that I might even have something in there that maybe not compatible with that person. I would still want to have, as an individual, the right to decide for that particular case in that moment whether I was going to take the chance with that. Because sometimes rules are meant to be broken or bent. You know what I mean?
Debacle, and when I did what I was doing was send part through.
Excellent. Yeah, now that is good. We could actually help by doing that, but there's something about reducing the amount of, something to do with the blood crystals. There's a certain level of blood crystallization that's needed to do ascension. All right, and when you give portions of your blood away, it takes the body quite a bit of time to make more of that. So it's more of, I think that's why I know there was an ancient rule of basically just how things work. It wasn't somebody made you do this, but if you wanted to keep your systems intact, You kept what was inside on the inside. You know what I mean? As much as possible. But I would say in this particular situation, especially since we're going into a time frame when we may have more terrorist activity, we may have natural disasters popping up left, right, and sideways, where there are going to be people that are going to die. If you feel like you want to give blood, we don't say don't. We do highly recommend certain things that for your own safety you're better off without. But I wouldn't say if you get in an accident or you're in one of these terrorist attacks and you're bleeding to death, it's still your choice whether you are going to accept blood or not. Sometimes you can. If you have knowledge of the Maharic seal, fine, accept it if your body needs to have the blood replenished. However, run the Maharic seal through it. All right, when you're laying there getting your transfusion, just see it going silver, pale silver light running through. So there's not a concrete rule where, oh, do this and don't do that. That's one thing I like about these teachings. Everything belongs in these teachings, and you have huge freedom of how you want to interact with it or what you want to do with it. There are certain things that are detrimental to your health, particularly if we're facing a situation where rapid DNA activation and having the body being able to hold frequency is important. Like if you want to if we happen to go into Plan B evacs and you want to be able to get through with your body through a Stargate, there's certain things you're better off not doing. One of them would be receiving an organ transplant. Now,
one thing I wanted to ask about blood too is that if you do run the Maharic energy through it and someone receives that blood, will it help them start activating and waking?
it can do a couple of things. It may, if it's a person that has enough of a human imprint in the strands, like even if it's an Illuminati that has a hybrid imprint, if there's enough of the human part of that hybrid left in the template, it can actually help to stimulate it. However, if it's completely a reversed matrix, which would be completely Illuminati, they don't have any of the human element left in it, it would actually create a reaction to the blood, where the blood could kill him, literally. So
Go back to whether it's a soul choice or they decide to have a blood transfusion.
that goes back to their business. Yeah, just like, whatever, if you decide to have a blood transfusion, you're not going to blame the person who gave you the blood if something goes wrong. You made the choice, you accepted the responsibility. Them too. Okay? So anyway, yeah, I go on these tangents.
There's one thing that was used a lot in the 20s and the 30s. It was salt water.
Mm-hmm.
A certain amount, salted to a certain amount,
Right.
injected in the body. Within 20 minutes, it becomes new blood,
Ooh,
and it's very inexpensive.
that sounds a lot healthier, actually.
It's healthier.
Yeah.
Of course, the only drawback is that you must not lose too much blood.
Right.
But you can replace blood by this combination of salt water.
Right.
Within 20 minutes, you have new blood.
Huh. You know, it's interesting, too, if we get really good at Cathara healing, and I'm not that good at it yet, this has the potential to literally regenerate limbs. In the ancient Atlantean times, when we had more knowledge and more DNA to work with, we were able to do amazing healing things with the Cathara healing, using light and sound frequencies. You could regenerate limbs, you could bring organs back. If something happened to an organ, you could bring it back to its original divine blueprint, very, very quickly. So there are healing things. You could make blood grow. If you could make, like, arms and legs grow, you could make blood grow. So these are almost like technologies we have to deal with in this middle zone right now, where we're going from being a mutated cultural society on this planet back into the advancements that we used to have once upon a time. So I just always recommend you need to feel it out personally, what level you want to participate. If you have a liver that's going and you're going to die and not get to stick around and see how this all comes out in your body, you may just decide to have a liver transplant. What the heck? Realize when you do it, you're taking on part of somebody else's pattern, and maybe it's a good part. Maybe there's not a lot of stuff that'll have to be processed. It doesn't hurt to run pale silver frequency through it. Clear it first, just like when you eat, So, anyway, yeah. Okay, you had yours up before.
When I was reading about the 1930s, how they made treaties with the U.S. government, we're 99% asleep. Why would they even try to deal with us if they think we're so intelligent, in a sense?
They need us. They need us to get to a certain level. First of all, we're intelligent enough to, if they just tried take over, and there's more of us and less of them, even though they have big bad weapons, there's still enough of us to be a real nuisance. Plus, they need us on planet. So they couldn't get rid of us and just like, why do they have to even make treaties with us? Because they need to position us in certain places to get this done the way they want to. So it was a needing us factor. And that's a good thing that they have, because we're still alive since Atlantis. They would have got rid of us a long time ago if they didn't need us. You think I'd be talking about this stuff openly? You know, I mean, gosh, in the old days you used to have to like hide in people's basements where they had these specially built rooms that nobody knew were there to talk about this kind of, any kind of information like this. Right now, I'm in their faces, literally. I mean, we sell the product to anybody who wants them. I'm sure their Illuminati spotters have a nice collection of our material. But it's all right at this point to let the information go out, and we need to begin doing it. There is a protection factor. If they didn't need me, they would have shut me up the minute I started to speak. They need me. They need you. They need all of the indigos that have the highest coding, that 50,000. There's 50,000 level 1 indigos. They're the ones that have the top security codes that go with the last set of frequencies in the grids that have to be released. If they want those grids open, they need to be nice to them. Not necessarily nice, but they need to keep their bodies alive on the planet. So they can't do too much to us. Now humans are the ones that right now, they have created too many. And I say they created humans. They did it by seeding twists and lies into our religious doctrines that told us to go forth and multiply, that told us that birth control was wrong, it was a sin. What this has done was create, we've been like rabbits since Atlantis. We're just popping up all over the place because they wanted to create more bodies, more Illuminati bodies and more human bodies. Because if you got the humans on a reverse DNA matrix, you would get the reverse coding in the planetary grids. They'd open it on a reverse, just what you want them to do. So now they've got all these extra little bodies running around all over with human souls, and some of them with Anunnaki souls, some of them with Draconian souls, and now they're activating on a 12 code. The humans are activating on a 12 code, and there's too many of them. They'll hit critical mass, and they won't be able to get through the gates anymore because we'll have the Templar back. So now this is why we're going into war, because they're in a real rush to start reducing human populations. Indigos have a safety valve because they have certain levels of coding that, and there's not as many of them. You know, there's only 550,000 indigos on the planet now, where there's, you know, billions of other people. So they have to get rid of some of those billions if they expect to keep the grids available for, you know, lower than D12 manipulation, and they can't do D12 manipulation. Okay, I want to try to get through these because I want to get to the other section, but I don't want to miss any on these because it's important to get an idea of who we're facing, because these are the people, these are the beings you're going to see behind the eyes of a lot of people. People you might know right now, people you might meet on the street. It's one of the, bless you, it's one of the least fun parts of the whole thing. I felt very, I must say, when I first really was given the information to see what's really going on, my first reaction was I felt raped of my innocence. That's what I felt. All of a sudden, I had this huge pain inside where once you know a certain level of stuff, you can't go backwards and pretend you don't, even if you'd like to. You can say, I won't believe it, I refuse to. It will gnaw at you. You'll start to see stuff now. You know it goes with that. So denial doesn't work. But there was a huge sadness in me when I realized that I couldn't just go into any situation with humans any place on the planet and just love them to bits and trust them and think that, oh, well, they're humans, so they'll have some degree of compassion and they'll treat me nice too, right? Well, if it's a human that doesn't have a human inside of it, it may not treat you nice no matter how much you love it or how nice you are. It may lie to your face. It may kill you when you turn your back on it. This was the part the part of the teachings that were very hard for me, because that innocence where you just want to like people and spread love and healing around, or at least be just a good person and treat other people like good people. All of a sudden you have to start looking and see what lives in there and realizing that sometimes what lives in there, no matter how nice you want to be, may smile in your face, but will do something to cause harm to you. This is the hard part. One of the biggest tricks with this is, and I have seen this so many times, you get somebody that has field possession. Even if it's not all the way in, sometimes they'll just hang out in the fields and use them when they want to. When it's a regular person, most of the time. But then something will come through and move through them. And they'll usually act out of character when that happens. They'll do something nasty, or they do this with kids a lot. Indigo type 3s, they do this with them a lot to trigger them to do wacky stuff like shoot kids in schoolyards. But one of the hardest things is when you realize there's this dual presence happening, where there's still a portion of this person as a person, so you can't react to it with total, I'm not going to get involved there, with defense, because you feel bad for the person. But then there's this other thing that works through them. and it'll talk through their mouth, and it'll look through their eyes, and it'll mess with your field if you get close enough. So there's this real maturity level that has to happen when you come into realizing the nature of this game. And it's not that you just start hiding in your closet and don't let anybody come to your door. You know what I mean? Like, go away, all of you. You know, if I can't tell who you are, I don't want to talk to any of you. It comes right back to the self. If you're using your Maharic seal, if you're doing what you need to do to keep your biofields clear and make your connection with your higher parts and try to bring your avatar level of understanding in, and you can do this. You have this with you. It's about mechanics of how to run energy in your body and open your DNA to get more of that. Oh, I get it. Yeah, I am an avatar. Huh? You know, where that level comes to you. From that level, you can be safe. You can walk where angels fear to tread. You can go into situations, have relationships with people that have this problem and help them. But until you know how to utterly secure your biofields, and right now it's horribly hard because there's so many psychotronics being thrown at us and everything else, but you can help people that are in that condition. It's not about rejecting them, or it's not about saying, okay, I'm sitting on a bus and that one's a Drac and that one's an Anunnaki, you know, that one's okay. You know, it's almost like a part of you has to do that just to be aware. Okay, and then go like, okay, and I wonder, you know, what their avatar's up to. I wonder if their avatar is doing Emerald Covenant. So that's where it neutralizes it, where you don't start to get into like categorizing and, you know, breaking people up and saying they're the good ones and they're not the good ones. Where you realize the ones that we would consider genetically challenged are very often ready to do Emerald Covenant and to be nice guys, but they have a vulnerability that if it's brought to their attention in certain ways, usually they're not open to this level of material, but we can help them with healing, bringing the D12 frequency in to surround them with that and help them to get to the point where they can become, they will never become human. If they didn't start out that way, they're not going to become human, but they will have hominid form, they will be a human hybrid form, but they will still have the consciousness from where they came from originally, just like we'll have human consciousness or indigo consciousness. Mm-hmm.
I understand that you said that indigo children cannot come through any of these races.
Mm-hmm.
If the parents are any of these races?
If they're the pure strain Illuminati ones of these, they can't. What happens a lot of times, because the Magi races here were targets. Okay, they were targets for infiltration. They would take an Illuminati race line and tried to marry it off with a Magi line to create a child out of that would have Magi and Illuminati codes. So if it would depend on which template was stronger, be it the mother or the father's, whether the child line would come out as a primarily indigo with Illuminati overlays, which are like frequencies that are over the DNA codes, but the core code is still, you know, a Magi or a human. Or if it goes the other way. It depended literally on, at conception, whether the mother's template or the father's template had a higher frequency, and whichever one had the higher frequency would set the dominant pattern for the core template. So you can have people, now for indigos to come in, like full indigos to come in, they're coming in, the indigos incarnate from either the Rishik levels of the primal sound, primal light fields of density 5, dimensions 13, 14, and 15, or they come in from the Ascendant Masters level, which is beyond the time matrix in the primal sound fields. For 1s and 2s, level 1 and 2s to come in, they have to find somebody that has the core Magi DNA template. It can have overlays that they might have picked up from the parents, picking up from their parents kind of thing, as long as it wasn't the codes themselves were Illuminati codes. So all of the indigos, level 1 and 2, now in this time frame, they have pure strain templates, most of them having some overlays, which are like they're distortions in the template that they pick up from the parent gene line. Yes, into the father and the mother get passed down, but they can clear them much more easily because they have a core template of the Magi line. So they're at the core, their template is not compromised, which means they have the ability to, their chemical DNA will manifest certain things after it clears off some of the earlier stuff, and a lot of times they'll clear that during childhood and adolescence. So by the time they go into adulthood, early 20s, and then into the 30s, they're back to their pure strain, you know, template. Okay, so I think that answers the question. Yes?
I just wanted to share that a significant event happened to me about 6 weeks ago. I found a letter that my father wrote in 1937,
Ooh.
December 23rd, 37, where he described profoundly detailed abduction.
Really?
Horrific abduction of himself.
So he,
Brother,
right, and it was written in 37?
1937.
Yeah.
I have it.
Yeah, because all through the 30s, the Zeta groups were doing the abductions on behalf of the Draconian agenda. Yeah. Right. They probably gave you some insight into why they had been, after you. Yeah. Okay, I gotta get off this Mylar. Okay. All right, Dracos. We're down here on Dracos. Okay, Dracos are a reptile-human hybrid. They were actually created on Earth by one of the raiding periods before Atlantis. They were created about 1 million years ago. And they were raids before certain things were done to the human template that wouldn't allow procreation between other strange race forms that weren't human and humans. There was this race called the Dracos that was created with a little help from genetic engineering. They look like they're hominid, and they kind of have like bodybuilders type, male bodybuilder type bodies, but they're scaly. They're like kind of greenish. Some of them are brownish, scaly, and they have very big, kind of like dinosaur face head things, reptile dinosaur things. And there's a couple people that I know. There's one guy. His name is Brian. I won't go into his last name, but he works directly with them on the UFO circuit, and you can see them crouching around him when they'll do their what they're able to do is they can go into density 2, which means they can do the ghost thing where they're there but you can't see them unless you switch to D4 perception. So these guys are. They're hanging around a lot. Some of them are small. Most of them are large. They'd probably be about 7 feet tall, and they're large. They'd be scary looking to humans because they're like big lizards, like some of the stuff you see on Sci-Fi Channel. I think there was one show they did a while back. Was it V? I think it was called a number of years ago. Where they had these big nasty things. They look like humans when in the daytime. Well, they're kind of like those things. In fact, I think they based that show on what was really going on. So they kind of hang out with, they'll hang out with the Odetocron reptilians, they'll hang out with, some of them hang out with the Omicron draconians, some of them hang out with the Andromes. They're kind of one of those, well, whoever seems to be winning will stick with those, and there's factions among them. They're not one of the main players themselves. They're more like the Gophers or the Foot Soldiers that the others who are in command will send out to do something and to do things. Down here, we get into the command central people. This one, the Necromaton Andromes. These are little masterminds behind the United Resistance and a whole bunch of other things. These are the things that people like, bless them, Alex Collier and a lot of those guys on the New York circuit are dealing with. They're Andromes, they're beloved Andromes. Their Andromes are Necromaton Andromes, and there's several strains. Some are the beetle people. All of them come out of the original Necromaton Andromes strain, which is insectoid beetle people, which means they're kind of like hominid insectoid beetle coding. All right, like if you took the genetic template of a beetle, and you took it of certain other types of insectoid strains and of a hominid form, and you kind of put them all together and came out with a new thing, you get one of those. Okay, these are the ones that were the Raelians. Were these guys? Where I saw the big beetle thing inside this pretty little French lady. It was amazing. I said, "Oh, what is that? I've never saw one of those. What is it?" Well, I know now what they are. Okay. They also have created their own Illuminati hybrid line, which are called the Men in Black. You know, the classic Men in Black syndrome, the thing that they even made the movie about. That they look more human. That's because they combine them with some of the Leviathan races. But they're also very, very, their health doesn't handle the light that's on surface Earth very well. So the Men in Black guys tend to do the underground bases and hang out, like in subterranean areas. So do the Dracos, because both of them don't react well to the type of solar light spectra that we have here. They'll come up and be around sometimes, but they have a tolerance level where it would start making them sick if they tried to live on surface. So the Necromaton guys have a bunch of underground bases all over the place. So do the Zeta Regalians, and recently they've all been joining all their bases up and using all their technologies and putting them together to try to make sure they get these wormholes put together so they can defeat the Guardian races. Okay, now the Necromaton and Andromede races for a long time have had their own agenda, but then they pair up with some of the others, but they have really run their own show, and they're about the smartest of all of the races, even the Anunnaki. They're part Anunnaki. Originally they started out with part Anunnaki and part certain types of draconian races, like the insectoid level of the draconian races, the fallen seraphim. So they have the D11 strand So they're not as, like as far as the D10 draconian races, they have more on the ball genetically and intellectually, mentally, because of that. And they're masterminds. They're like stratagems, however you say that. They're very good at strategic planning. We'll go there. Okay. Now, they come from various parts of the Andromeda system, also in Phantom Matrix, and Alpha Centauri and Omega Centauri. All right. They have taken over something that used to be one of the founders grids. When I talked about the original founders races, the Christos founders races, we had the Seraphi. They were one of them, Seraphi, Seraphim. They had put an APIN system here that was called the Golden Eagle. And it was a particular grid, and that was really the one that they were supposed to be the ones that were trying to found this country, and they, like American Indians, were supposed to be helping them when it got taken over. Now, the grid that's called the Golden Eagle APIN system was taken over by the Andromi Necromaton races, and I forget when that was. I think it was around the 10,005. No, it was before 10,500 BC, before they even opened the wormholes. So the Golden Eagle grid became what's called the White Eagle. Now, anybody that's familiar with the Templar Melchizedek's movements or Melchizedek priesthoods that don't bother telling you that they're Anunnaki Melchizedek priesthoods, they have the symbol of the White Eagle as that's the Melchizedek White Eagle. Well, it's not our White Eagle, and we're the Melchizedek Cloister, which were the ones that supposedly were the High Council that all the other Melchizedek priesthood worked with. Well, this particular group of Andromes hijacked the Golden Eagle APIN system. To put it in our faces and kind of thumb their nose at us, they call it the White Eagle, as if it was the Christos Eagle. These are the guys that run the false Melchizedek priesthoods here. Now, at certain points, they've worked with the true Melchizedek priesthood, where they were entrusted with certain levels of knowledge that they wouldn't have got otherwise. And then they would leave, and they would break the treaties, they'd break the Emerald Covenant, and they'd take that knowledge and they'd use it against us. That's exactly what is happening in the Melchizedek movement here. When the stuff in Voyagers Volume 2 comes out, because we're just doing the second reprinting on Voyagers Volume 2, and just got in on time. It was getting to go to press, and the Trade Center thing happened. So my publisher said, well, can you do something little on that? Yeah, right, 150 pages later. We're exposing all of this, and we're exposing the difference between Melchizedek priesthood and Melchizedek cloister, because they're not going to hide under our skirts anymore, pretending that they're running good agendas. This is going to enrage a lot of people that are out there in the New Age movement, because most of the people in the New Age movement that call themselves Melchizedeks have been trained by either Thoth, the Nibiruan Egyptian Anunnaki, or these guys, the Necromaton Andromes, who are running Luciferian Antichristos agendas, trying to hijack bodies. So at this point, when this material gets out, and I can just see it like going like a virus through the internet, there's going to be a war among the Melchizedek races, and they're all going to try to beat up on me, and I don't really care, because somebody has got to tell the truth at this point. You don't have to believe my truth, but I know my truth, and I'll speak it. And anybody that wants to listen is welcome. Yeah. So these guys are running. These are one of the primary forces behind the false Melchizedek movement that's going on out there. And they have all sorts of, usually star children with very sweet names that do all sorts of different metaphysical wow-wow stuff. And a lot of it's like the light, love, and clueless movement, where they teach you this much, but they don't teach you the rest, or the pieces that fill in those pieces so you can get what that much means. One of the groups the Thoth groups, bless them, they love to keep your mind excited. They will give you sacred geometries and complicated all sorts of things to keep your mental body doing all sorts of neat things, and you think you figured it out. But when you really stop and think about, okay, what can I do with this to change my life? Well, I know the numbers on a golden mean triangle, or a golden mean spiral. Okay, what are you going to do with it? I don't know, they didn't teach me that yet. You know what I mean? There are things that we're being taught to do just enough so we get to mess with the grids. They're teaching us just enough Templar mechanics to get the Merkabahs running very strongly on the reverse rotation, so we can run. They're going to teach their groups, or try to run reverse round tables, but we beat them to it. We got the round table stuff down in its original form, and it's already been, going out there. So already there's something they have to prove us wrong, and they're not going to do it. So they just have to beat up on us and call us names. But anyway, these guys, the Andromes, Necromaton, they're behind that. There's a bunch of them that side with the Anunnaki groups. They're primarily the ones behind the Melchizedek groups. There's another group of the Andromes that like each other, but they have a disagreement of opinion, whether they like Anunnakis better or Draconians better, because they really don't like either of them very much. So you will have Necromaton and Andromes work on both sides of the game. You'll have some of them helping the Draconian agenda races, which are those guys up there, and you'll have some helping the Anunnaki races, which are the ones down the bottom. And now at least everybody got together and they're all just working against us, so at least it's easy to keep track of them. So these guys come from the Alpha Omega Centauri. That's why they call themselves, we are the Alpha and the Omega. We are the Alpha Omega Order Melchizedek priesthood. Yeah. They forgot the word Centauri. Okay? It's planet reference that they're talking about, not the beginning and the ending like they're trying to make it look like. Yes?
In your circus training, are you going to tell how you tell the truth on these? I mean, you're telling us how to tell a natural one, but how do you tell it?
There's a couple clues, I'll tell you right now.
Okay.
You can't tell them by what they look like or what they wear, unless you're really good at sensing energy and you can see stuff in the fields, because they have stuff activated too, and it's hard to tell if it's reverse or not. You can tell by what they teach. Do they teach the Christ story? Do they tell you Jesus was crucified? Because if they do, they're teaching Templar Melchizedek stuff, which is the lie version. All right? Do they, let's see, that's another clue. That's one of the big ones. If they endorse the Christian story. If they endorse the whole Mother Maryism stuff. All right? That was about their hybrid that they had here. They actually birthed a hybrid in at the same time that Jeshua had come in. Within a couple of years, he was younger than Jeshua. Jeshua actually baptized him. And they named him Jeshua too. And they made up their story and put it in the biblical thing. And, Jeshua just did his thing and did the CDD play translations. And, Jeshua wrote the books of the Bible along with John the Baptist and Miriam and a bunch of Essenes, where this other guy was put in. And they have used him. Now, the Templar Melchizedeks will use the symbology of Jesus having crucified, and now he's coming back, right? They will use, let me see, that's one of the biggest. What's some of the others?
Worship Lord Melchizedek.
Oh, yeah.
Kundalini.
Yeah. Okay. They'll teach things.
Dimensional structure.
Right. They will teach, there's a concept here that the word was worship there. Okay. They will teach you to worship this Lord, that Lord, Lord Melchizedek, as if it's a being that's floating around up there in the cosmos that you're supposed to pay homage to, and it will take care of you. They will teach you to worship things like Archangel Michael. They will teach you to surrender your power to all sorts of different things, Maitreya. All of these things that are coming out in the New Age movement are associated with these guys' teachings. Templar Melchizedeks will teach you to give your power to somebody else. They will teach you 9-dimensional sciences only. They will not teach you 12-dimensional sciences. They will not teach you, in fact, some of them will teach you to be afraid of the D12 pale silver frequency. Some of them will teach you to run it on a 13 code, which is actually, you try to run the Christos frequency, but you can only get half of it. You get about 11.5, and you can reverse it. They're trying to teach you to do it on a reverse current. They will teach you Merkaba mechanics to get you to spin your Merkaba the wrong way. They will use increments in Merkaba mechanics, such as the, what is it, the 34-21 ratios. All right, these are reverse 11, base 11 mechanics, actually, that go with 11-strand reverse DNA. They will teach you, when they teach you about 12-strand DNA, and they give you a diagram, you will see 12 strands that form 6 double helixes, not 12 double helixes. Because they're teaching you just to integrate to D5 level on a reverse matrix. And they're calling that ascension. So there are little clues that if you know the metaphysical movement, you can start to be aware of what they're doing with that. But the big one is, the big one that's like a knife that just cuts right down between us. Do they endorse the Christ story? Do they tell you what's in the Bible is true? Because if they do, they're not representing Melchizedek Cloister, and they're not telling you the truth of your history. Do they tell you that Anunnaki created you? That's another part of what some of them will lead you to believe, that the Anunnaki were the superior race that were here before, and they genetically engineered humans from this particular primate form that was here. They will teach you these things.
They teach you the structure and function of oneness, of what oneness is. Right.
Oh, yeah, the heart thing, that's a good one.
They don't teach about the oneness, it's based on what the mechanics that hold it all together, right?
Right.
And the guardianship and everything else. They don't tell you what you're
Right.
doing.
The heart thing's a good one. Another classic, just like Christ story, this one's perfect. Just open your heart. Right? Light, love, clueless. There is some real interesting coding in here. Open your heart means what you're giving yourself the suggestion is open your fourth chakra that's connected to your astral field. Now they tell you to do this without teaching you how to run D12 Christos current, so you can't seal your fields. They're telling you to go around with your heart open, let everything move through you, so anything it wants can attach to you. These are some of the clues of how to tell a Melchizedek Templar, Melchizedek, from a cloister Melchizedek. The cloister, the word cloister it referred to the group of the Melchizedek ascended masters that at different times would come into this time matrix if things got too out of hand, where teachings were being twisted and everybody was getting lost and messes were being made. They would come in as a group unto themselves. They very rarely, they didn't get highly involved with genetic intermixing with other races. They would carry the codes and keep the codes, so they would be able to bring the knowledge in from the Ascendant Master level, so they could keep the information here and bring it back whenever it was needed in its pure form. And they've done that repeatedly, and then the other guys go and grab it, take what the good stuff is, and see what they can use, how they can use it to manipulate people, and then they edit the history and they put in a false history. So the little clues are, though, the crucifixion story, because Jeshua was not crucified. I mean, people that have been to my workshops before know that we all have incarnations in different places right now, and I was affiliated with that group. He was my half-brother. I was Miriam. And so nobody's going to tell me he's crucified. I don't care if you're the Pope. You know what I mean? Who appointed you anyway? You know what I mean? That's how I look at this stuff. We're taught to, worship the Pope and look down to, up to all these people, and they can look down on us. Who are these guys anyway? Who put them in these positions? Who said? God said? What God is that? Is it Anunnaki? Is it Drac? Or is it the real one? You have to get to the point where you have to realize you are no less than any of these other pompous people out there saying they're so much more important than you. You have other places that you're manifesting right now. You don't remember because your DNA is not turned on. But you have other places, people that may be one of the Essenes, that may be one of the Egyptians. So you don't need to have, do that subservient thing. I never ever ask. I know who I am, and I know a lot of where I've been. And I've been in lowly places, and I've been in high places. Whoopee. But I don't ask people to give me their power. I don't say to you, I'm so much more important, so you have to listen to me. I'll get you ascended. I don't do that stuff. Anybody that does that, that's another little clue. If they'll get you ascended, but you can't do it all by yourself, they're not telling you something. Okay? So these are some of that. All that was in response to the question of how do you tell a Melchizedek from a Melchizedek cloister? And it's in what they teach. It's not in how they look so much, but it's in what they teach. What are they teaching you to do with your power? And are they teaching you that you have right now in you an avatar that you can fully embody? Or are they teaching you that you have to karmically earn it, or that maybe someday you'll get to that, but you're not there yet? Because if they're doing little tricks like that, they're misleading you. Because right now you have the ability, if you were taught the right mechanics, to open up your DNA and progressively get more of yourself in. And they won't teach you that. You can also tell them by what they won't teach. Okay.
What's
anyway.
the acronym AEON? Is that it?
Oh, I was going to look into that one. I don't know that one yet.
Anunnaki's Omicron.
AEON? Somebody uses that. Who uses that one, the AEON?
I see it all the time.
That's not Galactic Federation stuff, is it? AEON?
I'm not sure.
Is it?
No, it comes out with Galactic Federation or something like
Okay.
it. People keep generating that.
I've seen that acronym used, and I never asked what it was, but it's something. It's like a coalition group thing, and they teach you it's one thing, but it's actually something else. I forgot it. I think it probably came through when I was on a roll. Yeah, sometimes stuff will come through, and then I forget it too, unless I hear it on back on the tape because it comes through so fast. Okay. But anyway. All right, these guys are the ones that are causing so much trouble right now. They run the White Eagle program, the false Melchizedek program that everybody's just buying into right now. We even have Dracs running Melchizedek programs now, which is like historically a miracle because they never liked to deal with them. But like even the Omicrons are saying, that works, doesn't it? That's a way to get into people's fields. Let's try that. There was one movement that the Dracs created themselves in order to get into people's fields. They created the Reiki movement. I figured I'd get gasps. On this one because there's so many people that learned Reiki healing. And these people just want to learn how to do Reiki. Now, Reiki's great. All you do is run it with a D12 frequency with you, and it'll work for the good. But it was given to be able to allow certain things to get into people's biofields. The healers became... The healers became... you would actually be implanting people with their signatures. When you get your Reiki mastership, you're getting zapped by somebody who has already been zapped by one of them or one of the ones that, you know, they pass on the zap. And the zap is a set of frequencies that go into your biofield and create overlays on your DNA template, which create implants in your biofield that make it very easy for Omicron or Dedicron Central to send their lines of communication in. And they can come in and say, hi, I'm your higher self. Hi, I'm God. You know, and they can call themselves anything they want once they get into your inner communication systems. Now, Reiki isn't a bad thing. It was based on twisting of a system of healing that used to be part of the Cathara healing program. So, if you use it with running the right currents, the D12 frequency, it will clear out the distortions. You'll also find, like with the hand, when you move your hands with them, your hands will want to do something different when you're running D12. Your hands themselves, when you're starting to work with it, you'll feel that it doesn't want to do that movement. It's telling you something. If you run the D12 frequency, in those when that frequency is in your body's going to know what goes with D12 and what doesn't. So it's going to want to move a little different. That's where you take Reiki and you let it go into kind of avant-garde, where you let your own Christos move with it. But you can still do good with Reiki. But Reiki can't go to the core template like Cathara does. All right, like Cathara healing, you can use any healing system with Cathara, and it'll amplify the good parts of that system, and it'll clear out the negative. So we're not anti-Reiki either. Say, use everything. Use everything with the D12 frequency. And then you can enjoy the whole world. You can listen to all sorts of music, even if it's saying the Lord's Prayer backwards, and it's still not going to affect you. All right? Yes. Not that I recommend that. Okay, the symbols. A lot of people have.
If I do the D12 and teach the class all of this, would that mean that if there's anything negative about the symbols, then it would be fixed with that?
Yeah, you know what would be good for people that are Reiki teachers? Because there's a whole lot to explain here to people that you may not want to get into in a simple Reiki healing class, because like you have to get a whole class before you can get to that Reiki class. What the easiest thing to do is, you can use Reiki and you can teach Reiki, but teach them one very important part of Reiki, and never, ever, ever use it without it, is the Maharic seal. Teach them how to do that, and teach them the Cathara healing running of the higher currents, and they'll actually get better effects from Reiki, because all Reiki is using is three-dimensional currents. It's telling you it's using other ones, but it's not, because it's not releasing the seals in the body that allow the higher level currents, what we call the what are they called? The triadic phase currents to come through. They're the higher dimensional currents. Okay, so you can actually hybridize Reiki, Cathara Reiki. Well, that's good. It's wonderful, because you've learned a system that's being abused, and now you've learned that it's being abused and how that system can be healed. So you can actually help, just like there's people that can help the Bible by knowing that Christ wasn't crucified. They can help take the good stuff out of something and put it in its right context where it can be helpful again. So we don't tell you to, burn those books. I've heard some of them say, don't go to that, burn that book. You know, it'll like the frequency coming off, it'll get you. Like, well, if you're using your D12 frequency, you're not going to have to worry about hiding from everything, because it'll transmute it and balance it. Yes?
You know, in Reiki, when you teach, there's a part where you're teaching them, you're doing a Reiki meditation too, and they get in contact with your Reiki guide. Do you think it would be appropriate to do the Rishi meditation?
Yeah, that would work with that. So, like, I haven't taken Reiki. I just somehow that got edited out of my education, and I didn't do that this time. They teach you to hook up with a Reiki guide on the other side. Right there, change it.
Some teachers do.
Okay, if they teach you to do that, that means get yourself assigned an Omicron. Okay? It's more like getting an overlord than a guide. When it comes to that part, you can redirect them, not to another guide, not to a Guardian Alliance guide, you don't need to their own Christos level, their own D12 level. Get it across to them. They have this level of a Christ itself, right in them. And you can teach them to use the Maharata frequency, the D12 frequency. And they don't need a Reiki guide. They've already got a Reiki guide, the Christos self. Okay? Yep.
We've just created a new form of Reiki.
Have
It's
we?
called Maharic Reiki.
Hey, Maharic Reiki, there we go.
That's it.
Okay.
That's all.
He's registering the trade name right now.
Yeah, they probably get us for the similarity in spelling.
Far better registrant there.
But see, there's a lot of things that can be resurrected and turned into good things if we know, first of all, why they're not working as good things. Because if we think they're good things and they're actually doing damage, we're just going to keep getting overrun by them. But if you realize where something's being compromised, learn enough about, okay, that's compromised there. What could we do to take the good from this, to use the good, but to get rid of the stuff that's messing it up? Just like with all the religions. Take every holy book. find the stuff that really helps you feel closer to God, right? That helps you to feel closer. It doesn't tell you to give your power away. It's going to be hard to find in some of those books. But take the good stuff. Take the stuff that teaches you to love and to turn the other cheek and all this stuff in the Bible. Take the stuff in Reiki that actually can work. Just don't have people assign power to something outside of their own Christos self, and teach them how to seal the channel to their Christos self with the Maharic seal. You can do it with Reiki. You can do it with any of the other programs out there, unless they're ones that tell you you have to have people plug into something. That's a warning sign right there. Like you have another bunch of other groups like the Urantia book. Okay, the people that do the Urantia movement, they're another Anunnaki, Jehovah Anunnaki hijack program. All right, the people that do the Course in Miracles, that was actually mostly influenced by Archangel Michael. These guys, Nephilim, the Nephilim out of the Andrami matrix. Okay, see down here there's several different kinds of races that are affiliated with the human Anunnaki hybrid Nephilim. Now that's where the Archangel Michael matrix fits in. They run the Necromaton agenda, and the Archangel Michael matrix is kind of partial to both. They'll run Anunnaki and they'll run Draconian, and they'll run them right into each other sometimes and turn them into something else. But what? Archangel Michael? No, it's a personification. There's not a nice person that used to be an angel that had some problems. And I hate to think that, like, you know, Raphael and Ariel and Gabriel and the rest of them probably come from the same crew, you know? Because I used to have an angel that I talked to that was called Raphael. I mean, you know?
Same transmission station.
But after a while, you start to realize, like, even Thoth. Now, there is a Thoth, and he does happen to be an immortal because he's been running on a twisted D11.5 anti-Christos current since he broke the Emerald Covenant, and they figured out how to do that with biologies. There is an individual called Thoth, but Thoth is part of the Thoth Anchisophelium collective. There's a whole Anunnaki collective that are, you know, that is the Thoth matrix. You know, with the Archangel Michael one, it was a little different. There wasn't exactly one Archangel Michael. There was a collective that decided if it were going to be one, what image would it want to portray to manipulate humans? So it came up with the Archangel Michael and a whole matrix of angels to play with. You know, there's a whole bunch of them attached to that. Enoch is the same way. Now, Enoch was an individual, still is an individual. Did I get down to the, yeah, I think, you can go to the next page. Yeah, I tend to do this. See, I could probably go through a week with a pile of 5 of these.
On the Reiki symbol,
yeah.
Before you go on, this one of those codes are add to heart, the key that you gave here.
Antankarana?
Yeah. That's a Reiki code.
The Antankarana? Well, the Antankarana is a word that it's not just a code, it's a word that refers to, in fact, I think it originally was a Sanskrit translation of one of the old Emerald Covenant languages texts. It refers to the 9-dimensional Kundalini currents, the currents of energy from D1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and they're the ones that would plug into the Maharata currents, the Christos currents of D10, 11, 12. And they plug into the ones higher up that, the Kirashe and the Kundalini. So when we use, I mean, they might use the word Antankarana. I don't know what the heck they're passing off as that, but what the Antankarana is the word that's referring to that 9-dimensional pillar of Kundalini energy that plugs into the higher dimensional pillars. Okay, when we're doing the exercises, that, like, she was referring to a type of reading that we've just started giving in the last, like, year, where there are certain codes given, symbol codes, that your avatar would give to me. I literally get them out of your biofield and draw them for you, and you use these codes in a certain way to progressively build your Antankarana. It releases in the right sequence, and the only person that knows the right sequence is your own body and your own avatar. You would release in the right sequence the Antankarana, which is the progressive release and building of the currents of Kundalini energy, which are the life force currents that run up the middle of your body. And as you build them, they actually expand out this way until eventually you become a pillar of light. Like your Maharic seal. Your Maharic seal is D12 frequency that you're actually activating and come down here. But for that to go all the way through your system, which will be a 12-strand activation, you have to have all the frequencies between D1 and D11 before you can plug D12 in to make it stay. You can create a field around you, but it's going to be temporary as long as your thought form is holding it there. But it's still going to go down. Your body won't hold it. with these type of exercises, and the word Antankarana is referring to that those smaller currents of Kundalini energies that allow eventually your Maharata, your D12 frequency, to plug in permanently and to stay in. And you would literally be surrounded at that point and permeated. You start to feel this really neat thing when you start to make the connection between the Antankarana currents, because they built enough, and the higher currents coming in, the Maharata. It feels like, I've only experienced this once or twice for a day. It happened like a full day I had of it. I felt the wind blow through the spaces in between my cells. It's a very neat feeling. You start to really feel difference in how your body matter operates when you do this. So if you see the word Antankarana, I mean, I didn't even know that Reiki talked about it. It might be interesting to explore what they say about it. But Antankarana, the real meaning of that word is referring to the 9-dimensional currents. So if they're using a code, I don't know what they're using for it. But with any of the Reiki codes, 2 things with Reiki that I see that are the only adjustments you have to make. One is whenever you're using any of the symbols, you could you need to run your D12 frequency. You could also, I'm just getting this here, you could also try reversing the symbols. That would I just got that would help if you reversed the symbols. Like if it's one that's not totally symmetrical, where it'll look the same either way, you can actually just reverse it. No, but yeah, like not up to down, not vertically, but this way, yeah, and use the opposite. The easiest way to do that with Reiki, you'd like take the code on a piece of paper, right? Flip the paper over and literally trace it on the back and use the one on the back. That's the way you would do it. So you'll get more, they're saying you'll get more benefit out of it, but even if you don't reverse it, you can still get some benefit as long as you use the D12 frequency. But what you're doing is implanting people and not knowing it, and amplifying your own implants when you're doing it without using the D12 frequency. These are the tricks that have been run on us. It's amazing.
The other point is that any of the Reiki teachers, as and when they choose to become ordained as Melchizedek ministers, and they're at regent level, they can incorporate ordination effectively in the attunements they do.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll let you talk about that later. That needs more.
Yeah, we'll be going to talk about ordination anyway.
I don't want to get there yet.
All right.
I don't want to go into ordination now. That's tomorrow. If I go there now, we'll never get through those miles. Okay, how are we doing on time?
Well, I figure if we break it 6 for supper.
Break it 6 for supper.
For an hour and 15 minutes. You got another 35 minutes.
Okay. How about this? How about we break at 6:30 for supper and take a 10-minute stretch? Does anybody want to stretch? Because I'm noticing happening, and the stuff we're getting into now is gonna. This is the stuff I'd like you to still be awake for. Because at the end of one of these workshops, most people just walk around, because so much data is given. So we could take about a 10-minute break just to stretch.
Like that. Do you want me to hand it?
Oh, cool.
I'm just asking. Sit down and leave them now, do we?
When I start talking about that stuff, we can get get them around. But let me get past this stuff and start talking about this. Actually, you can now, because we're going to go right into that. Go for it. Save time. Why not? Okay. You've got another little insert of paper coming around. This is the timeline of things. This is what, as soon as we get through with who's who, we're going to go into what happened to get us here since 1916. So you get a sneak peek, because you're getting the pages here for this. Now, anybody that has the Templar manual, these are they're all hole punched, so you can just slip these in, take the staple out, and put them in the back of your book if you want. If you don't have the Templar manual, that's okay. Just at least you have these, the updated material from this workshop. Okay, now, because I want to get to the stuff that's being handed out now even more than I want to get to this, because this is important, but the other stuff is what's going to really get us up to where we know how we got to where we are, so what we need to do with it. I'm going to go through these pretty quick as far as the rest of who's who. Okay. We had the Draconian and Reptilian team primarily on the other page, and then we got introduced to the Necromaton and Dramies, who are like the brains behind the brawn. Now we're going to go into some of the other collectives. These collectives at this point have all unified themselves into what's called the United Resistance. Resistance refers to resistance to the Founders and the Emerald Covenant. So they are races that are representing what is considered an anti-Christos agenda, because the Christos agenda, Christos is always what it originally meant, was referring to the D12 pre-matter divine blueprint that allows you to connect your frequencies to the primal light fields and primal sound fields and source. So you have an endless eternal supply of energy, so you have eternal life and ascension and all those kind of things. They're just like natural things that are supposed to come with a package. So, but the other guys won't teach you that because they cut it off, usually at D9, some of them at D11. So literally when you're dealing with training that comes from any of these other matrices, the highest they will allow your energies to go will be to be 11.5. Now these are the real shrewd ones that are trying to figure out how to run a partial D12 current on a reverse matrix, and this is what some of the Melchizedeks are doing, because they have enough knowledge about the sacred sciences, they have more than the Dracs do, that they're trying to run it on. In fact, they used the mutated version of the Fibonacci spiral to begin running it on a reverse current. They can't run a whole D12 on reverse because it'll automatically put itself back if you run anything more than the 6th sub-frequency band in D12. Every frequency, every dimensional frequency band has 12 sub-frequency bands within it. So what the negative groups are doing is they're trying to run on a reverse current, which means the natural scalar wave patterns and their sequences for every little dimension and every little subharmonic in the dimension. They're trying to reverse the way the fire letters work so they can break the current off at the D12 level. So they can use as much of that life force current that they can get, but they do not have to plug it in to source, so they don't have to learn to be cooperative with the other races. They want to be gods themselves and create their own little matrix, and if anything doesn't agree with them, they kill it. And that's basically their orientation. Now, the other races that are involved with the Phantom Matrix, these are races that at various different times in their evolution, since the creation of Phantom Matrix in 250 billion years ago, at different times, some of these races are older than human races. They're not older than the founders, but they're older than human races. Their planets have ended up in the Phantom Matrix, or their race has ended up on a planet in the Phantom Matrix. Now, all of these guys that are considered fallen angelics are from that Phantom Matrix black hole subtime distortion system. All right, some of them have escaped at different times and actually are like in density 2 of this time matrix. They have civilizations and cultures there, but most of the places that they come from are the Phantom, because they can't live in this time matrix too long because their bodies start to deteriorate because it runs on the right current and it's too strong of a current for their mutated reverse current bodies. So most of them have their primary bases, even though they can visit and pop in here on any of the densities. They have, they live in that time distortion system. It reminds me of an episode of Star Trek or something. A long time ago, I saw one thing where it was Star Trek Next Generation, I think, because I remember Captain Picard in it. There was this one scene where something had happened and they'd gone through some type of time warp. And they ended up with, like, the way they filmed it, where they showed, like, there was a version of him, of Captain Picard, stuck over in this other thing that looked just like the system he was in, but it operated different. And he was over here stuck, and they were both stuck. It's like he got split in half, and half of him was in this sub-time cycle that was distorted, and they're trying to figure out how to get them back together without having the whole thing explode, which was their problem on that show. But it's kind of like that, where if you could see it, it literally looks like this other version of this universe that's a bit different, but enough similarities because it's built on the same original pattern, where literally we keep each other stuck in time because we can't fully evolve while we have an open connection to them. They're trying to suck energy from us to literally suck this system in, and we're trying to pull away from that so we don't get sucked into the system, because eventually that system will implode. That's the difference between a living time matrix and what's considered a dead matrix or a black hole matrix. If a black hole matrix doesn't have all of the matter that fell into it pulled back out and reassembled into its original divine blueprint, eventually it will keep pulling energy in from whatever it's connected to, and if it becomes where it's not connected to anything, any live energy system that it can feed off of, it starts to feed off of itself, and it literally starts to consume its own energy and break up its own patterns where it implodes. So like the life forms, the body forms are like holograms that eventually, if you don't suck energy off a living force, like a living life force that has its natural currents, its Maharata current and its primal light and sound field currents, if you're in a sub-matrix like that one that can't access those higher eternal currents, you literally, the systems implode, and the planets will eventually implode, and they go back to literally space dust. And that's what they have to look forward to. They call it ascension. Well, the only way they can stay alive in their eternal finite bodies is by vampiring energy off living systems. So this is what we're dealing with when we deal with the phantom matrix. Earth became involved with this 5.5 million years ago. It was the end of human seeding 1 on this planet. Human seeding 1 started on Earth 25 million years ago, on parallel Earth 250 million years ago. Now, 25 million years ago, seeding 1 came here, and we were to repair the grids on planet Earth. So far, Earth didn't have its equivalent in phantom matrix. There was a huge, massive war that took place then, where other wormholes that are different than these that have been closed since were created, and part of Earth's grids literally got siphoned into the black hole matrix. Now, in order to try to assist the life forms, the humans and the Anunnaki and the Draconians, that ended up on that Earth in that matrix, so they didn't just shut them off so they could never get out again. The founders created something called a wall in time. It was a frequency barrier between Earth's grids here in this time matrix and the grids of the portions of Earth that had gone into the phantom. They could have severed those grids, where there would not have been a connection anymore. But the people and the beings and the consciousness in the part of Earth's body that had gone into phantom would be in on a finite implosion cycle, where eventually you couldn't rescue it. It would go down in frequency too far where you couldn't plug it back in. So they kept a wall in time, a frequency barrier, to allow those two places to still be open to each other, but not like an open door without a lock on it. Because the risk in doing this was that the other phantom matrix systems there with the fallen angelics would, if they could get through that wall in time, they could invade here. And that's exactly what has happened. Now, the wall in time is 5.5 million years old. This is why with some of the Templar Melchizedek teachings, there's another little clue about their teachings. Most of them can't access anything before 5.5 million years ago. They say, gee, there's this like block in the planetary memory banks, and you can't find any information on history before that. Yeah, right? Well, if your consciousness is running on a reverse matrix and all you can draw information from is the phantom side, you won't be able to go past that block in time. So I know one of the very popular Melchizedek teachers talks about the wall in time that you can hardly get any information back on the other side of. That's because they're coming from the phantom matrix location. Now, various times in seeding 1 and seeding 2, there was the wars over, making rips in the wall in time and things trying to come through. This has been an ongoing mess. In Atlantis, in the third seeding, it got really bad. That's where the 2 wormholes that are the major problem that we're having right now were created. The races that we're dealing with, there are a lot of them. It's not just cut and dry like, okay, you're the good guys and we're the bad guys, this kind of thing. It's not like that. There are all sorts of races with all sorts of agendas, but they still come in 2 basic categories. Ones that are working the Christos agenda from the living time matrix, and those that are working the anti-Christos agenda from the fallen time matrix. Now, the ones in the fallen time matrix, there's a lot of them that want to get out. They've evolved enough by raiding here, they've gotten themselves into human bodies here, but they started to pick up some of what that means. So they started to grow more than the ones that they came out of in the first place. So they started to rebel against their overlords and things that were in the Phantom Matrix. They didn't want to just be the little puppet soldiers that were going to be used to destroy this place. They decided they wanted to do what the humans were doing. They wanted to get a redemption contract. They wanted to get their DNA healed so they didn't have to be dragged around by the fallen angelics anymore. It was like fallen angelics, imagine yourself as a big avatar collective saying, okay, I'm going to make like 50 million of myself in this race form down here, and then I'm going to make them do what I want them to do. Well, the ones down here become conscious, but they don't remember the whole, just like it's hard for us to fully know that, our avatar's up there someplace. And they got tired that once they realized they were being run around like little puppets, like, a child playing with dolls. The doll got tired of being a puppet. The puppet got tired of having the strings pulled, and they decided that there was a better way and they wanted to live peacefully. So there are a lot of them, just because they originated from there, doesn't mean that they're going to get sealed back up in there when it comes time for the Christos realignment here. That's why right now, this is the big rush. Talk about lines waiting to get to, like, how you go into a bank and you have, like, huge lines on Fridays sometimes. You should see the line over on the Phantom side for the ones who want to come over, that they're willing to do anything, because they know it's going to be a permanent sever this time. It was decided in 22,326 BC that the critical mass over there had reached too much mass compared to here, and that they had to close they had to close the wall in time completely. They had to sever the two planetary fields, because if they didn't, this whole matrix and the other density levels of it were going to get sucked in. That's when all hell broke loose, literally, because you have fallen angelics over there that, well, they don't want to be nice. They want to be able to still do their dominion campaigns and raid things and work with anti-Christos ideas, but they also don't want to be sealed off in their own time matrix where all they have to feed on is themselves. So they have been trying to prevent the Christos realignment mission here, because they are confronted with a very black and white choice. You either stay in the phantom matrix, and you know what that means. You'll evolve. You might even have another billion years to evolve in there. But that's it. Once that system starts to implode, you're with it. You go back to space dust. You're still part of God, because God is literally the energy and consciousness field that all of this is taking place within. So you can't be separate from God. But to be able to evolve enough to remember and have the mastery level of mastering of density, where you can come and go as you want to and have freedom, those kind of things come with evolving and ascending through the full matrix. If you implode, you go back to square one, where you're space dust, where something else is going to use you, what you used to be, as just raw units of consciousness to form other things. So they're being faced with a very difficult choice. It's kind of like, either be nice, and if you be nice, here's the Emerald Covenant. Enter a redemption contract, you get DNA bioregenesis that will allow you to hold the frequencies of the living matrix, and you will progressively learn to lose some of your bad manners that you've been using, because they have some atrocious ways of looking at other life forms. Exploit, vampire energy off it, gimme, gimme, gimme. That is what their whole consciousness is oriented toward, because they feel cut off from their own life force currents, because they are. So they have to feed off other things. So everything they do, the mentality is all about that. If you look at how our societies are built, it's scary. When you look at the business world, particularly American style, there's something real scary about what that's turned into. Once upon a time, it was built on at least an idea that sounded good, like people were going to kind of, everybody was going to be able to try to have the American dream of a nice life and be able to have money and things. At this point, it's cutthroat. It's wherever you have to step on to get where you want to get the power you want to get. This is coming from the mentality set that comes from a life field, wherever it is, a life field that feels, does not feel its living currents, connecting it to source. It will feel fear, a very deep primordial fear of its own finite nature, and it will try to compensate for that fear by acquiring power from outside of itself, because it feels powerless inside of itself. So the mentality and the horrible ideas and lack of ethical systems that consciousness like that comes up with all goes down to a very deep core pain of feeling finite and feeling that if you don't take, that the universe is finite, the universe is limited, there is not enough energy for you, there's not enough power, you have to grab it from somebody. This is where their whole competitive dominion thing comes from. They could be healed, but to try to convince them of that, it's like, good luck. They've been trying to convince them for 250 billion years, and they're still choosing. They're choosing, most of them, the overlord ones, the dark avatar groups, they are choosing to stay in that condition. But when some of them incarnate, and then they get that individuality thing happening, where, yeah, the avatar's up here, but now it has its little foot soldier. The foot soldier still has a bit of free will, and the avatar will try to drag it around and try to say, no, you don't have free will. You're just a face of me. You have to listen to me. But once the being gets out here, it's like a part of it wants to have its own consciousness. It doesn't say, okay, I'm just you. It doesn't identify with that way, and that's why they're rebelling. So this is why there has been, with the hybrid races that I've talked about, the Leviathan races, one of the reasons that the fallen angelics made a big deal about coming in here and getting everybody's DNA messed up wasn't just to suppress the humans. It was because all of their Leviathan races, who used to be incarnates out of their matrix that agreed to be anti-Christos, got here, started to evolve, and decided they didn't want to be anti-Christos anymore. And they were all petitioning for Emerald Covenant and wanted to get out and get away from the Phantom Matrix and their overlords. And that's when the overlords realized they were losing their energy feeding ground, that they were losing their foot soldiers, and they were losing their access to Earth and the potential of getting to the halls of Amenti. So they went after them as well. This is why I have a lot of compassion. I do feel compassion for the Illuminati races, because they may do really icky things here, and they do. Some of them don't do anything icky. They don't even realize they're a part of that. But others do know to some degree they're a part of stuff that's not being fair to other people. But they don't know any better. But these races came out of lines of Illuminati that didn't want to be Illuminati anymore, that were trying to break free. And because of that, it was like the great axe from the Phantom Matrix came down, and they messed with the DNA so they would be able to continue to manipulate them. So it's like the bad guys that really decided they wanted to be good guys and were siding with the good guys and trying to get away from them, but they got dragged back in because of it. So this is why I feel a compassion. I try to teach that don't hold our hostility. If we feel anger, there'll be a point where rage comes up. That's healthy. You just don't let it stay there. You know, you have to move it into something more positive. But it's not the Illuminati that are to blame. Who is to blame for the mess here are these guys, these various groups. But if you want to blame them, yeah, it's their fault, but why is it their fault? Because they got code convolution way back a long time ago that twisted their DNA and their minds up in knots. And it made them very sick mentally. Very intelligent, some of them, but still psychotic. Now, are you going to hate a person because they're psychotic? It's kind of useless. That's why I try to say, when we get into these races, let's find enough compassion to realize if there are ones that want to come over, if there are ones that are interested in the material, you might not trust them as far as you can see them, because you have to be careful with that. Because a lot of times they'll get the urge down here that, okay, I want to be good, I'm going to do the right thing. And then if they have field attachments, the other thing they're connected to will come in, get itself in position as somebody you trust and, like, you know, in a situation where you trust, and then the other thing will come in and try to sabotage you. I've had that happen a lot. Like a couple workshops I've had that happen in, and those kind of things. So it's a real precarious game, and there's a lot of game players. When I talk about the possibility of field possession, all these guys you're seeing on these lists are potential candidates for who might be living in there. So it's not just cut and dry. Okay, is it a lizard or is it an Anunnaki? There's a lot of them. Now we have something called the blue centaurs. These guys, a long time ago, raided the Hindu cultures, which were an angelic human Magi Grail line. They took the sacred texts, so the Hindu texts, and they twisted them and put all sorts of weird stuff about the way karma works. They took out the teachings a simultaneous time, so they created a belief system there that wasn't an actual belief system. It wasn't part of the true teachings. That if you're born in a lowly station of life, then you have to. I mean, they literally treat people that are born. You know, they have that caste system where they'll treat people horribly because they were born into a certain line. This was never the true Hindu teachings. Sanskrit teachings were originally one of the sacred teachings, just like what became Christianity, or what was supposed to become Christianity, was too. So the centaurs, the blue centaurs, this is where they get. If you look at some of the Hindu art from different periods, you'll see like all sorts of wild things like blue people and blue oxes and things like that. Now, they have a lot of affiliation with the blues. All right, some blues are good blues. You have your blue human Maharajis of Sirius B, who are one of the primary guardian fleet protectors here. They're the guardians of Stargate 6. They're called the Council of Azerline. They're the ones that if it gets into live combat here with spaceships flying, it's their spaceships that come in first because they're closest and they can get here fastest. They intervened on behalf of the Hindu races at different periods of time. One, I think it was like 5,900 BC, and there's still records in some of the texts of those times when the spaceships came in to break up the Atlantean, wars. Yeah. So these are the Magi Grail lines from actually they're a line of humans that interbred with a race called the Azerites, which were one of the Universal Templar Guardian teams, and they were very blue. They were very blue hominid, and they had kind of like feathered heads. So the blue humans are a combination of regular human, which is an Oropheme, combined with the Azerite races that are blue people. There's a whole group of them that were hijacked by one of the draconian agendas, and they're actually negative. So just because it's a blue person doesn't mean it's a nice blue person. This is how complicated this drama is, but it helps to understand some of those references, because you can say, okay, well, all right, that's a blue person if you happen to meet a blue person, which we might in the next 10 years. You never know. In fact, we probably will if it goes well. You can meet a blue person, and you can realize that, okay, it might be this race or it might be that race, which means it might be a part of this agenda or it might be a part of that agenda. Then you still need to learn to feel, to sense what type of feeling it feels like that person has, because just because it's blue doesn't mean it's nice or doesn't mean it's negative. Now, the centaur races they're blue, but they're like half hominid on top and actually half like cow-like thing on the bottom. And they're different than there's another group called the Marduk Centaurians, which are part Anunnaki, and they're like kind of flesh-colored hominid on top. They're not blue. And then they have kind of like, I think it's a goat type, like a large goat type thing, horse goat on the bottom. So there's these things from mythological, you know, in the old myths that they talked about, the centaurs and all those. They weren't kidding. These people are real people, and they come in sometimes. They have been on planet visiting at times. So there were races, you know, in the ancient time periods that are going on now that know that these types of beings are alive. You know, not everything is hominid and bipedal like we are. So these guys, they tend to, the blue centaurs don't come in too much on their own. They work with, they kind of impulse from afar. They're the Leviathan races that they infiltrated. Their primary areas of Illuminati infiltration are in India, in the Middle East, and various different island nations. So they went for like the small groups of islands here and there where they could get, you know, primary infiltration. They're associated with the Hindu and Sanskrit text distortions. I have that spelled wrong, distortions. If there's any misspellings here, by the way, forgive me please, I was in a hurry. So we will be cleaning this up for the final copy at some point. Okay. They are involved with some of the Wiccan schools, the religion of witchcraft Wiccan schools, not all of them. They work closely with the Andromi Necromaton and with Draconian agenda, Omicron Dragon Mods. So they're basically Draconian agenda. They're not a Draconian reptilian race, but they honor that particular agenda. And they work most closely with the Andromis, the Andromi Necromaton races, the ones that like the Draconians better than the Anunnaki. All right, then we have these guys. Oh, these guys are real sweet. The Jehovian Anunnaki. These are the classics. These were the first Anunnaki races. All right, they were created by the fallen Anu Elohim as the Avenger race that was meant to destroy the human races and the founders so they could take over the time matrix on behalf of the fallen Anu Elohim. Now, the Anunnaki races they have been hybridized with just about everything else that walks, speaks, or thinks in this time matrix. So there are many, many different strains of Anunnaki. But the ones that consider themselves the pure strains were the bipedal dolphin people of Sirius A and Arcturus and, what do they call it, Trapezium Orion. That's where these guys come out of. These are all fallen matrix systems. These guys run the APN system called the Dove. I don't know if anybody has heard about the Dove, anybody that studied the Keys of Enoch. Now, in 1983, Enoch entered the Emerald Covenant after he had broken it in 10,500 BC to join the Luciferian Covenant. When he joined the Luciferian Covenant in 10,500 BC, they tricked him. He was a representative of the Jehovian Anunnaki. He had once been entrusted as one of the guardians over that particular hybridization program that was trying to help them. And he went bad. But Thoth went bad first. Both of them had been entrusted guardians. They had done bioregenesis. They had gotten themselves to the point where they could have been Christos beings. They were appointed as guardians over large groups of the hybrid races in order to lead them into Christos evolution. And in 22,326 BC, Thoth decided to side with the Anunnaki and go for the takeover agenda because deep down he really felt that Anunnaki were still superior to humans, so they should be running things. That's a real strong imprint in the Anunnaki races. And Enoch felt cornered into the whole thing. He didn't think the Guardians were going to win things because the other guys were getting so far, the Anunnaki races. So he figured, well, all right, we'll side with you guys. Bad decision, because as soon as they did, they tricked his whole group, and a whole bunch of them were exterminated because they wanted them exterminated. They didn't like the bipedal dolphin people groups. The Thoth groups didn't like them. So Enoch kind of went for his first redemption contract right after that. He became a CDD plate speaker, and he did some books of Enoch that were translations from the Cloister Door Tour plates that I'm receiving the history information and things of. Now, he was one of the Emerald Covenant speakers for a time, and then he got hung up with another agenda, this time on behalf of the Jehovian agenda. He felt that the human races, what was really bothering a lot of them was the realization that the founders were going to close the Phantom Matrix. You either got out or you didn't. It wasn't that you were not offered opportunity to get out, because there were like constant extensions. Okay, we were supposed to close it in 22,326 BC. You guys messed that up. We didn't. Okay, well, we're going to close it here. You have from this point in time to this point in time to get your groups evolved to a certain level where they're ready to, behave themselves and not attack every guardian race that comes across their path so they can stay out of the Phantom Matrix. We will help them out. These were the deals that were offered to Thoth and to Enoch. Enoch felt that at the point in time after his downfall with the 10,500 BC issue, where he joined the Luciferians and they betrayed him, he came back with our guys, worked them for a while, and there was this whole chaos that went down during what's called the Christ period. And it was like between 12 BC and 27 AD was the main time frame in that. And there was a whole big mess that went around during there where Enoch's groups were part of the Emerald Covenant, and they started to follow the Thoth groups instead of Enoch. And because of that, this happened about maybe 300 years before the Christ period happened. By the time the Christ period happened, his races that his Jehovian races that he had been trying to evolve had de-evolved to the point where he didn't think there was going to be enough time between then and 2000 to 2017 AD, where they would be ready to be able to be taken out of Phantom Matrix when it was going to be closed. He was told that there were ways that could have been worked, and there were. But out of fear for his own race, and also out of disgust over a lot of things, he was being pulled in a lot of different directions. He finally said, forget it. Forget the founders. I'm an Anunnaki. I'm a Jehovian Anunnaki, and I'm just going to be true blue till I die, and I'm sick of this whole thing. So he decided he would break the Emerald Covenant. He did that in, I believe it was 10 AD, that decision was made. And he has worked an Antichristos, Jehovian Anunnaki World Dominion agenda, primarily run through the Hibiru faith, not Hebrew, but the Hibiru line, calling themselves Hebrews. And in 1983, he realized what a bad decision that was. And he realized how bad this drama was going to get. And he petitioned again for him and his groups to have what's called a host matrix out, which means because their fields are such a mess, they'll never be able to sustain the frequency of going into the frequencies that are going to be needed to create this separation. So he asked for a host matrix for him and the groups of his people that would accept it. Now, before that, in 1972, he began to write certain things to get grid mechanics done. This is where certain books that I don't need to name, because anybody who's involved with the Enoch work knows the name of the book, and I don't need it on film. That particular agenda, that's known as the Enoch agenda, in this time frame, was written, I think, between 1972, right around in that time frame. This was still the Jehovian One World Order Dominion agenda. And what's happening now is they're still using Enoch's name, and Enoch is out of it. He's not the person dealing with his contacts here that are writing his books and things. It's not even Enoch. He's also wavering. They don't know. The Guardians don't know if he's going to be able to maintain his commitment. He has so far. He did not join the United Resistance, and he is still Emerald Covenant. But he's under so much pressure, and his groups, by the Anunnaki groups. He's not, he used to work sometimes with me. They assigned him to me to find information for me if I needed information on certain things, particularly from the Jehovian Matrix. If I needed to find out, like, okay, what are they up to with that? He would be a gopher, and that was part of his redemption contract. I never had a relationship with Enoch like some people do. Oh, hail Enoch. It's like, hi, guy, you again. You're going to make a better decision this time. But so far, he's been doing really well. But he's not permitted to be an official Emerald Covenant speaker until we get through this to see if indeed he stays on that side. But at least that collective and a lot of the Jehovian Illuminati people are being guided to us because of their affiliation with Enoch, where then you have the other movement that's running the matrix of the dove. This is where you get into the dove APIN system. This is one of those implant systems in the grids. It's one of the smallest, but one of the nastiest. This is the one that'll rip the grids apart because of the 7 seals. This is the one that we're starting to have the effects. We're going to be, because we just released 3 of those seals released, because 3 of our natural seals released. These are the ones that the Jehovian seals in the planetary grids are what we need to do round tables to balance and clear, because if not, we're going to see a mess here within the next 2 or 3 year period. It's going to start. We're going to have major climatic problems, and they're going to go into earthquake problems, and they're going to go into even worse problems. So the dove matrix, it seems so sweet. And like the teachings, I remember when somebody gave me one of the Enoch book, and I said, oh, this is neat, and I like Enoch, I deal with Enoch, so this must be good. and I'm reading some of this stuff, and some is, brilliant stuff, and yeah, I like this. And there's certain parts that I had some real problems with the sound tones in the names of God that are given. So wait a minute, this doesn't sound right. And then I was thinking, there's a part, Return of the Nephites. The Nephites are coming back. I was thinking, I know that name from somewhere. I didn't find out who the Nephites were exactly until they gave us the history, going from the Neanderthal to the Cro-Magnon to the hybridization thing that had been done, the hybridization plan. The Nephites were a group of the Illuminati infiltrated hybrids that had been taken over by the Jehovian fallen angelic matrix, the Jehovian Anu Elohim. And they had taken them off planet, a whole group of them, and they had accelerated their DNA in certain ways, combining the 8th axiotonal line and 8th DNA strand with the 5th to create a 13 strand, which, like a 13 code, which is like what it comes out to be is a mutated reverse 11.5 frequency capacity. So that is their eternal bodies that they're working on. Now, when I found out who the Nephites were, it was like, oh my God, it says right in that book that, hail the return of the Nephites. This is a good thing. This isn't a good thing. And I was thinking, what's going on? Because, well, I know Enoch's worked with me since '83, and I know he's a good guy. I mean, the Guardians send him to me. And then I started to get scared, like, uh-oh, somebody messing with me. And that's when they started to explain about the redemption contract, that Enoch was on a redemption contract and all of that. So the Nephites are a kind of like souped-up version of Jehovian Illuminati that came out of the Hybiru race, not even the Hebrew race, but all of the Hybiru race and the Hyksos race, which are both Illuminati-based races, have literally overtaken and move themselves into power positions all along. They have since Atlantis, into power positions within the Hebrew human